Hello, everybody. Welcome to my virtual seminar. Thank you for joining us. My name is Misha Cavey. I am the strength and conditioning coach and soft tissue specialist for South Bay Lakers. It is a privilege to be a host here on Basketball and Barbells virtual summit during this weird quarantine time, but it is a wonderful time because we are really sharing information right now. I right away, when I had all this free time because they canceled our league, I jumped on the learning bandwagon as well as putting out content. I was putting out a lot of YouTube, started my YouTube stuff, and just just trying to help people with exercises and put out the stuff that I'm talking about today, even what I strongly believe in. So this is a time to be learning, and it's a time to be sharing. And one of the things that when Xavier asked me to do this, even though it was a big challenge to me at the time of how am I going to condense and put all this information into into a presentation even, it was really exciting because again, this like fuels your creativity. I mean, this is what I believe in. This is what I want people to know, what I think we should know. And same with all the other strength coaches. And as you go through each one of our summits or presentations, I think you'll start to definitely see some crossover in some topics, and maybe you'll see something completely different. But that's where you can pick and choose the things that you like and the things that you think are relevant and what works for you. And as you'll learn, that's even something that I've done myself to come out with this picture. I'm not just regurgitating one person here. I'm sort of brought together numerous people's works and starting to see this pattern. And that's what we're coming here to present to you. And hopefully all of us strength coaches bring something to the table that's going to make people think differently and maybe implement improvements into our industry as we attempt to train the next generation of athletes or even regular clientele. To me, it really doesn't matter, actually. On the private sector, I work with regular population. And it's funny, you see the same dysfunctions. I mean, there might be athletes who might have a lot more bigger muscles and some more extreme problems, but dysfunction's about the same across the board. And that's some of what we'll even get into today that you'll learn about. And so, yeah, I'll talk about a little bit more of my background in just a second. But, like I said, working with basketball players, quick little background about me. I am, born and bred for basketball. It was the first sport I fell in love with. Truth be told, I was raised in London until I was 18. So I am originally British, but now I'm American. When I was 18, because I was so in love with basketball, I knew I wanted to go to America. So I went out to America, tried to do the whole college thing, played a couple of years in junior college, but didn't really do much. And after that, realized that I should probably get into the field. If I really wanted a career out of this, I should get into the field of coaching early rather than continue playing. So I chose not to go to a smaller Division III and play or anything like that. I chose to go to Division I and intern, basically, and learn the ways. I did not really enjoy it that much, to be told, working with the basketball side. However, I was doing kinesiology on the side to gain my knowledge of science and whatnot. I worked with the team as a video coordinator, which is why I went to Cal State Northridge. They gave me the best opportunity, but it was also a lot of stress too, not getting paid, which sucked. On my last year, finishing up my kinesiology degree and working with a team, getting some experience, I interned in the strength and conditioning department, and that's when the love kind of took over, and I was like, ooh, I like this a lot more. Prior to that, I'd done 3 years of working with coaching, everything from player development skills to a year interning as an assistant with my junior college alma mater, Santa Monica, just working on the wings of the head coach there, to then the video coordinator at Northridge. Did all that. I was kind of like set on the physical side of things after I did my strength and conditioning internship. Then I graduated from college, work in personal training. And then the blessing of my life came when I got to work for the Lakers as a ball boy originally, or even the defenders first, and moved on to the Lakers. And that's when I was just like, oh, this is where I'm at. This is where I want to be. although it was a tough crowd to fit into, so I really had to learn a lot of things. I had to pick brains. I was very fortunate to work under Tim DeFrancesco. Shout out, great guy. I learned so much from him. Still one of the most advanced strength coaches I've seen out there in terms of his way of programming, thinking, and exercise selection. The massage therapist, Marco, I can't pronounce his last name because he's from Finland. He was a great influence to Marco Nunez. He was a great influence. I mean, even I picked Judy Cito's brain, and she's director of sports performance right now with the Lakers. I just basically was like, if I'm here, I'm going to try and learn from these people who are so-called the best, and I'm going to be on their level, even if I can't, be as educated as them. And then I did side certifications. I mean, I did my licensed massage therapy because I knew I needed the hands-on technique. And then I got into fascial stuff, little bit of posture with fascia, because at first we thought, well, we're going to create posture by fascia, some trigger point release, neuromuscular therapy. And then eventually, that led me down to having this sort of product of, well, I'm this fascial release posture guy. That was when I then got lucky to be where I'm at now. I got the job as a strength coach for the Defenders at the time, now South Bay Lakers, which is like about 4 years ago. So from 2014 to about 2016, I've been working just in privately and at the gyms, just doing posture corrective stuff and seeing people, in their homes, or they're coming to my homes. One of the earlier companies that I got with was Myo Detox. They are a structural integration or anatomy trains based fascial release company. Do check them out. They're from Toronto, opening up locations around America. Great program. And they started off as a fascial release just with manual therapy, but they evolved into more fascial movements. And so I've been kind of with them in terms of learning from them, and also kind of branding off in my own style since 2014. And so that's one of the reasons why I even put this first picture slide up as we're kind of getting into that, is because that was our earlier assessment of postures, that we had this sheet, and okay, well, we had the human up there, and all right, now what do we see? You see the left shoulder down or up, and the right side bending there, and then, maybe one hand's higher than the other. So that was the earlier years. This is what we kind of went by. And to be honest, I don't anymore, but we will talk about why. The most important thing is, let's just think about the starting point of what is posture. So like I said, in the early years, you kind of had the first client up there and you would assess them, the front side, the sides, okay, and then the back side, we'll do pictures, and then sometimes, you do the fascial release, and you do your after pictures, and sometimes you get an improvement. That sometimes, you just basically release the connective tissue or the muscle tension, and you're actually able to get a little slight improvement. Those were never long lasting. They were always very temporary. And to be honest, muscle releasing in terms of when you're trying to do fascial release, none of that seemed to be any permanent. The real magic seemed to come from moving and doing exercises and different, lots of different things on top of course, releasing muscle tension. But we'll get into that. I'm not actually going to talk too much about posture, but that was some of my earlier influences of posture, as we'll see in the next slide. But first, I even want to say just what is posture? Well, posture is the tale being told by all your body systems working together or not working together. And this is just the cover of the story of the book. So that's another thing. It's like, you think posture, well, the fascia is pulling you down this way, so it must be tight. And, there's actually a whole lot more to it than that, which is why, again, I go back to the sheet and I was just like, I don't know if that's really the right way to address a human being, is to think like, well, he's bended on the right, so we need to just open up that side. We have to understand what is going on here, and that's not just a right lateral fascial tension pattern going on. There's many things going on. It's a whole system. But why do we even look at posture? Let's even ask that question. Well, we want to look at posture. We want to consider posture because the human body will fall into extreme ranges of whatever pattern it is, and that usually, more often than not, will be extension. An extension, extreme range of extension, will limit movement capabilities, i.e., the squat. So you go look at go figure someone's doing a squat, and if they're going into successive lordotic extension, they're going to really not be able to get all the way down, especially the ass to grasp what we want, or maybe not even, maybe barely even getting to 90. We can definitely question the Achilles and dorsiflexion being too tight. However, definitely without addressing that, that lordotic extension, you're going to fall into excessive patterns of that. You're never going to get into the desired state. And also, in any lift that you do, it's really going to take on a lot of load or pressure. And we're also going to talk about how that's affecting the whole dynamics of everything else. So that's one of the reasons why, we're even assessing, we want to assess in terms of sagittally, are they really extended? We want to assess frontally, are they tilted, side to side? And then of course we want to assess transverse, are they rotated? And I bet you, of course, everybody will have a degree of all three in both ranges. And we're going to talk about why, but that's ultimately why you want to assess posture, because you want to see how ready are they for movements. And some guys are going to need regressions, or some clients are going to need regressions. Some are going to be, bam, ready for that most complex lift. And that's, I think, it's not necessarily we want to change the program. I would say it's more about implementing strategies to enhance the body based on what we know. So there you go. And that's, that might even be as simple as, raising the ankles on a squat so they can get lower. But, we're going to go a little bit more deeper into doing that. But we want to ultimately, what we know about today and posture is be able to implement these strategies and be able to help the body and help us lift these complex movement and be able to be more comfortable with them. So, that's slide one, you kind of, your sheet that you originally used to go off. Let's go into slide two real quick. And go check out your boy real quick. All right. So this was me in 2016. So like right before I got my job as a strength coach for the Lakers. And this is right when I was into my fascial release therapy, along with corrective balance training and all that. And so, I was a real practice what you preach guy, I product of my, of what I said I believed in. And so then one day I had my own posture posture assessed or pictures taken. And I definitely didn't like what I see. I don't think anybody likes looking at themselves, which is one thing you'll learn with all clients. They always feel very awkward if you take pictures, which is another reason why I stopped doing it sometimes, because I was just like, what's the point? But yeah, let's just check it out, what we see. My front view, you've got what we can definitely see. My right hand is a little bit lower than my left. If you want to stare at my clavicles a bit, you'll see that left one is sort of being rotated, we'll say orienting backwards a little bit, okay? Not kind of influences how my SCM looks on the front there. Looking at the side view, yeah, definitely some lordotic extension. My rib cage is leaning back. I don't mind my anterior front. Some people who don't have good core control, that will really be hanging out. So the fact that it's relatively flat means I'm doing okay. And then you'll see the kyphotic sway in my head. Whoops, my head is definitely going forward. And I will talk about that, why. And we'll, of course, starting at the base, the anterior pelvic tilt, we see on many, many people. And then if we look at the back, I think this one's the most interesting one, because this is what I really didn't like, all right? You can definitely see now some transverse plane effects here. You can see that right side is kind of being pulled back towards us, okay? And we see some compensation in the left, the kind of mid-back area, right? What you call it, above the thoracolumbar thoracolumbar fascia area on the left. I call it back fat, but that's the compensation effect. But then the right is definitely just being pulled back. And if you look at my lumbar spine, it doesn't even appear straight. And that is pretty normal. Yeah, I am slightly scoliotic, and I didn't even realize it at the time. You know, I never been assessed for that until, you know, I got shown in my face. I was like, huh, I have a slight curve in my spine. And that's some of the normal patterns we'll see. But, you know, my thing is like, you know, I'm like, what? I'm doing all the right things and, you know, releasing myself. Well, why do I have these patterns? And so that was when I was actually going to take my next step, which is what I'm going to talk about today, down the rabbit hole per se, and really basically, you know, go into the depths of what is going on with posture, what is going on. And that's where the other two words meet. First off, respiration, and then we'll talk about gait and all that. But let's talk about, you know, what am I talking about today? So I want to give some plugs to some important people. First of all, power to these people. Definitely PRI is a huge influence, postural restoration influence. I'm going to reference them a lot today. They are a great program to check out, whether you are a clinician, strength coach, massage therapist. And what I would define, they held the ultimate blueprint to the human body and what is going on, and with these postural, postural patterns. You'll get obviously some exercises and strategies. That's what's so powerful about them. But I think the real power is the knowledge you acquired. Now you know what you need to do. So I want to give a huge shout out for Posture Restoration Institute. I think you should definitely look into doing some of their courses. Their beginner level courses are all home study available. So that's great. And some of their advanced courses are even online available right now during this time even. They're a great program, really in depth. You know, a lot of NBA strength coaches are about them, but a lot of clinicians are about them. Next program, DNS, Dynamic Neuromuscular Stabilization. I really like them too. This is a European-based, Posture Restoration is American. This is a European-based program. They're definitely allies to each other. They kind of believe each other and believe in each other, endorse each other. They are slightly different on a few things with regard to core and breathing, and we will talk about that later. But I really like DNS, and what I would say, they are probably the best set of core corrective exercises out there that, you know, you really can't mess up. I mean, you do that and you do that well, you can even add some load to it, and now you've really got bang for your buck movements there. DNS is basically based on the baby movement patterning sequencing. So you've got, you know, your supine position. This is where a lot of dead bug stuff comes from. Then you've got the roll over to the side, roll over to all fours, but first you got that whole transition. That's where a lot of these side hip bridge positions come from. And then you go over to the all fours position and crawling, and you got whole tons of variations there. I don't actually want to go into that, so sorry I'm not showing you any slides, but I want to give a big shout out to DNS, because that's also a great program to learn about posture, breathing, and how it's all related to Gait, which is why I kind of pulled up the next slide. And then lastly, another course that I would really recommend for you guys is neurokinetic therapy, which is an assessment course. It's assessing muscle activation, inhibition with facilitation. And so that's another great one in terms of talking about how the rib cage or breathing is related to so many other things, as well as gait being related to so many other things, including with posture. So basically, well, those are my big three. If you want to learn more about what I'm talking about today, which is posture, breathing, gait, and how it's all related, I would look into Posture Restoration Institute, Dynamic Neuromuscular Stabilization, or Neurokinetic Therapy. All of those programs will, to some degree, will teach you about how the breathing system and the nervous system is really affecting everything else of what we're doing. And that goes to my next slide of, and getting into, you know, what we're going to talk about with respect to posture, is that one thing that we really need to, you know, with the last slide, you know, my question out, you know, is like, why am I seeing this? And so, you know, after going into courses like, you know, like DNA, TRI, neuromuscular therapy, and neurokinetic therapy, I started to see how, you know, I was lacking certain breathing patterns and you know, and whatnot. And then I started to realize how complex the human body is, and how there's so many different systems that are moving us certain ways, and we're just being influenced to one versus the other. So, you know, that was just a static view of, you know, me holding myself up, or us holding ourselves up against gravity. But how do we move with physics, which is what basically what I'm going to my next slide. And that's basically, we must consider when all of this is human function. And that's why, again, why I didn't like that static view of me going into, you know, me in the posture, because against posture screen, because, you know, we're not really considering my human function. And again, we also have to consider human biology. So let's looking at the slide, figure 2, which is the second one of Usain Bolt running. Okay, let's consider human function. We were designed to move. You know, human beings were designed to move on 2 feet. Yes, I mentioned babies crawling hands and knees, but then what do? They push themselves into a deep squat. They stand, might fall down first few times, and then once they stand, what happens? They go off running. And that is really the key, is that we're basically designed to run and walk on 2 feet. We are bipedal beings per se. You know, very, very, very rare of the kind on this planet is just walking on 2 feet with 2 arms swinging. And that's what we're designed to do. Looking at, you know, figure 1, which is the top one, we have this fascial system, which, you know, runs in these connective chains, linked lines, all running the same direction. But what we've also found is that to enact certain movements, functional movements, these fascial planes or chains are acting synergistically. Now, we're going to get into how they're all, because it's not necessarily all your front line isolatively or back line isolatively. That doesn't really work like that. Sure, they can do that, but it's how they work together that creates this pattern that we are able to do. So actions like running. If you look at the bottom of the slideshow, we got running, jumping, throwing, striking, which could whether be with a weapon, bat, you know, bat baseball, or with your fists and your feet, you know, in martial arts, swimming, climbing. I could have missed some human function actions, but I pretty much feel it kind of falls into one of those. You know, if you're doing those, that is human movement. And this is not taking into account like cycling or a tool-based related actions. We're strictly talking human movement. And so, you know, we have this fascial system, right? And we have human function, which all kind of falls into this. This fascial system was basically designed to help us do all these actions, which we'll talk about later of how it happens. But ultimately, for most of the part, it results in an opposite arm and leg moving forward. And that's what we're able to reciprocate most of this power to basically, like I said, run as fast as we can forward, jump as high as we can up, or as far as we can up. Maybe not as high as we can up, because that will be an extended jump. But even then, if you're going to jump your max jump with a run up, that is going to be a somewhat contralateral reciprocated action where one leg is loading, one leg is floating, and then you're pushing up. Very little of this max effort is actually going to be a true bilateral push. You know, any of these actions, when you talking about doing at your fastest, well, you know, do your fastest climb, sure, opposite hand and leg. Your fastest swim, yeah, opposite hand and leg. But we definitely have other swimming patterns of bilateral, whether it's the butterfly or just front crawl. Striking is going to be contralateral reciprocation, where you need one leg planted, the other one upper body coming across. It's that sling action which is going to generate the most amount of power. Throwing, same thing. And that's what's really cool actually about throwing is that we're one of the only, practically the only species that can throw with accuracy. As an inanimate object can throw it with accuracy. We're not talking about any animal that can you know, have accurate eyes, obviously. Chimps, you know, as athletic they are, they do not have the ability to throw and hit targets like humans do. So that ability and to throw with such high velocity, such far ranges, again, it's a opposition pattern that is facilitated by all these fascial slings working together. And I've actually mentioned jumping again. Do not think of max jumping as this bilateral push. Think of if you are trying to run and get over something, you're trying to jump over a car, how are you going to do it? And there's going to be very little bit bilateral action of that. It's going to be very much of this, you know, like I said, contralateral action of human function, which is kind of what we're going to be talking about as well. Like I said, the gait patterning. And so, you know, basically this fascia is the key to 3D or triplanar dynamic movement in life. You know, it what allows us to do all these things. The static posture. So then basically going back to that, you know, static posture is basically posture of our extremes and what, you know, what's been happening up until how this fascia is being used. And then we have dynamic posture, which is basically how do we move with these extremes. And so they basically kind of work hand in hand, right? You know, if you're very sport with what much more of a right dominancy than any other action, you know, you're going to ultimately create more torque to that side. And then when you do a static posture, you're going to be very much leaning to the right, but then also you're dynamically moving to the right. So what's interesting about fascia and posture is that we become a product of our environment a little bit. It's just how are we manipulating that and how are we utilizing that? Okay, but hold on, we got a little bit deeper to go because we got to talk about, you know, breathing and whatnot next. So the real question when it comes to, you know, posture and this stuff is like, you know, how are we living? And that's the thing, you know, how are we living? And you know, we are in a sitting-based society. We sit so much, whether it's through schooling and then obviously coming home, we're lazy, we sit and watch TV, and then we like to get exercise. I think the modern generation does appreciate exercise more. But then even then, you know, how well are we exercising? How well are we moving related to what our bodies needs? And so, you know, that's definitely too much. We're doing too much sitting and not enough good moving, you know. And then on top of that, we're learning very poor movement patterning. You know, we're learning very bad, you know, squatting technique, deadlift technique, you know, bench press technique, running technique, you know. And, you know, that's part of, you know, we're in this on-the-go society, go, go, go. We don't have much time. I check my Instagram for workouts. Okay, I see that. I'm going to try it in the gym. And that's how a lot of people do it. You know, we're here to educate them, obviously, but we have to think that a lot of people, you know, they're not even thinking of what it is that they need. They just think, oh, well, I just need to get to the gym and burn some calories, because that's what we were told is the most important thing. So again, with learning poor movement patterning, again, now I want to go back to why I mentioned DNS, because this is what we actually do in DNS to regain proper movement patterning. Those baby movement sequences, especially when you modify them into actual exercise related positions and potentially load it, you're going to get really good development all around in multiple systems. You're going to work multiple areas, from breathing to the shoulder structure to even hip structure. And then, like I said, it's really good corrective stuff that's going to just help you, and you can't get it wrong, and you get stronger in multiple areas. So I really like DNS, and it's a great way to get you tuned up for these bigger lifts, such as deadlift, squat, and make you a lot more prepared for them. I think it's a great warm-up exercises or core that we can implement into our routine and benefit from. But anyway, let's just kind of look at this slide, figure 1, which is of the slouching. So, you know, I want to just quickly talk about this because, you know, what is slouching all about? And that's the problem, is that we assume slouching is the real bad thing, and then we try to force good posture with extension. So, you know, let me, you know, rock the boat a little bit with this. And what if I told you with this first picture of slouching, what if I told you Sam right here, we'll call him Sagittal Sam, is just really locked into his computer screen. And all of this upper structure is basically what is doing the extending. And although it's coming forward, we definitely see some neck extension, which is what's probably going to have to happen. And what was going to happen with his lower body, he's just pretty much resting, and that's fine. It's not good resting. It's slouching, and it's perceived to be bad, and is bad, and he's not breathing well. However, let me ask you this, the moment he gets up, is he not going to extend? The moment Sam goes to the gym and goes into the squat, is he not going to really extend? Probably. If he goes to the bench press like we see down there, is he not going to really extend? Yeah. And if he goes on the cardio machines, he's going to really extend. As you can see, all those people are in some kind of lordotic extension. Even the biker, his neck is going into extension, and we'll talk about that later, but the neck and the lower back are in a mirror relationship. So all of these people in these exercises are going into extension. So my takeaway from that is, don't, again, consider human function. Right now he is sitting, and that's absolutely fine. He's sitting, but the moment he moves, the moment he needs to do something, complete a task that doesn't involve his computer or the internet, he is going to need to extend. And that's where, is his body ready for that? Is he going to experience pain? Does he have vertebral disc problems? Does he know how to manage his breathing? Going back to this first slide of him looking at a computer, and so what if I told you that it was actually his vision that's causing him to come forward? Because what if we tend to think, oh, I'm really tight in the front, so I always slouch. Well, what if that's just your vision? You're seeing so poorly, you have to bring your head forward, because once again, the moment you move or do an exercise that tests your abilities, you extend. All right. And so what I want to basically, looking at this is just this sitting lifestyle versus training lifestyle. Don't be fooled just because we're sitting that we're not in some form of we're resting, but we are very much all extending. And like I said, sitting all the time. And a lot of these training patterns are, as we said, bilateral, and if we're not respecting these fascial movement planes, we're neglecting three-dimensional areas of way we can train, and not using it. We're neglecting we're basically neglecting three-dimensional movement and its necessities to life, especially when we're focused so much on these bilateral extension patterns. And then obviously, cardio, fine, you can relate that to gait, but the problem is they're stuck on a machine. So that's not really, I really like to think that's much three-dimensional movement training, because they're stuck in a machine. So, we've basically gone from, sitting at the desk where, although we are slouching, if we're constantly being pulled towards the screen because our eyes cannot obviously see the screen well enough. And how many people pull their heads towards the screen? Everybody, right? That, as much as you want to think it's, flexion, you're actually being driven into extension through your visual system. And we're just trying to rest as much of our body, but that cervical is going forward, and that's going into much extension, and that's stressing the body out. And then we get up and we go to the gym, we do our bench press, we do our squat, and we do our cardio, because that's what Sagittal Sam thinks he needs to do to stay in shape. And what has he done? He's done nothing but driven his body in extension, yet he has a beautiful fascial system to move him throughout three-dimensional ranges and all these wonderful planes, and yet we're neglecting this. So I think what we need to remember here was that there is a movement hierarchy that we should follow. And I think what was that is Gait is pretty much at the top of the movement hierarchy. And we want to be training for Gait, because like we're going back to the previous slide of all these actions of running, jumping, throwing, striking, climbing, swimming, etc. It is the same pattern as Gait. So if we were to all categorize that as Gait is pretty much the most important thing you're doing, or if we were to say contralateral reciprocation. Sure, let's take this athlete that's ruptured his Achilles or torn his knee, ACL. He woke up Getting up out of bed, yes, it's going to suck. That's not going to be the biggest of challenge to them. It's, I need to go eat. I need to get to the kitchen. Do they have to go to class? Do they have to go to work? And just being able to get around, that will be the real greater challenge, especially when you cannot load your weight onto one of your extremities, and then the other one has to do all the work. So this is again what we have to really consider, is that our training methods often really reflect a lot of bilateral movement patterns. And this is why I don't want to ruffle too many feathers, because I know strength and conditioning is traditionally about deadlifts, squats, bench press. We want to get those numbers up. Don't get me wrong, I do love deadlifts. I might talk about bench press a little bit, squat we might talk about a little bit, but there's a lot of these other factors that I like to consider with the body that I put as a priority over being able to push high loads with force in a bilateral pattern. Because there's this movement hierarchy that we need to follow and understand, that the athlete is going to be spending most of the time running and moving forward. Yes, there'll be change of direction, but if a change of direction happens, that is actually a shift over to single leg stance. And again, there's going to be implementation of fascial sling to recruit that fast change of direction. And basically the whole fascial system and its wonderful ways of multi-direction is what's going to help us into superior athletic performance, as much as force production, which is why I believe that we really should be training and basically preparing for the hierarchy, which is gait, ultimately. And then we can, talk about loading up the deadlift and whatnot. So let's move on, and let's talk about some underlying nervous system principles. So we have this biology of fascial system. So let me get some water real quick. Okay, so we have and we have this hierarchy of moving. Gait is what we do. So what do we know about the nervous system? Well, first of all, it is super complex, but it must be appreciated, even for its most simplest terms. So I don't think we've got too much. We're not going to go too detailed, but basically, the brain and vision is the key. You think something, you want it, and you go do it, or you see something, and you go do it. So that is basically why even you want to prioritize gait, because to complete actions you need to be able to walk to it. As much as we want to extend up, that's great. If you can't get to what you need to do, you're pretty much stuck where you are. So brain and vision, that's what you want to do. And the second bullet point, path of least resistance, I'm probably going to say that a bunch, but that is basically pretty much the way it is. The brain thinks of something wants to do, so it's going to find the most easiest way to do it. And that's an evolutionary response, as well as it is like, well, why not? We're just trying to save energy, and we just find the easiest way to do it. Another way I like to think about it is that, well, you don't have like your conscious over you or your mentor by you to always tell you how to do things properly all the time and how to move properly all the time. So you're naturally going to do things the easiest way, because, well, I need to go get something to drink, or I need to turn on the game and I have to go to the TV, so I'm going to get up off or get up and get the remote, and I'm going to do it with really poor technique. Or maybe something's on the floor and I'm going to pick it up on the floor, and I just don't really care what technique. And it's funny that even when I've lifted well and I'm strong and I have good technique, if I'm fatigued or whatever, you'll pull your back out even with picking up a piece of paper, just because you did it with poor technique and you were tired, and then that's it. So we always pick path of least resistance. So that's just something that we want to consider and think about it. Point number 3, flight or fight. This is what always confused me. I like to put flight, fight, or rest, digest. I really don't like how it's flight or fight, because it leads people thinking that those are two separate things. Flight, fight is on the same side of the spectrum. It's just, what are you choosing to do? Are you crippling down and saying, I don't want to do this, and then you're overcome with paranoia? Or are you just like really like aroused by this and like, yeah, come on, bring it on? Just maybe think of a fight. Just think of a fight, and people like I don't want to fight. That's, you know, you're trying to fight, and versus somebody like getting aroused, like, yeah, come on, bring it on, come at me, bro. Right? So, you know, that is really one end of the spectrum. And then the other end is rest, digest, which, go figure, kind of makes sense. You know, we eat when we rest, and then after this we digest and kind of sort of sleep. And that's how we sort of fuel the body. However, there is a necessity to somewhat of this flight fight, you know, adrenaline rush. You know, that's how we, you know, we're fueled by a lot of go, go, go in our lifestyle. Just because we're not hunting and fighting people, well, you're still trying to close in that deal maybe, or you're still trying to really do well at work today, or overcome your fears of your boss. I don't know. There could be many different things. So understanding flight fight is, it's not like, oh, this is a terrible thing. No, this is a range of the spectrum of the nervous system that we tend to be on. It's a range of stress that we tend to be in. And as you can say, is a stress that, you know, makes you go. And this is what, so if you look at a picture now, the green one, this is the kind of stress that makes you tired and just like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. Or this is a stress that actually fuels you and makes you think like, okay, I want to kick ass. I want to really go right now. So that's one of the things I want you guys to consider with the nervous system, is that, you know, there's a stress scale, and it can go from good to bad. You know, we need certain amounts of stress. It's just, are we getting too much of it or not, or we just the right amount? That's one of the reasons we actually want to weightlift, is that we want to implement certain amounts of moderate amounts of stress to create neurological adaptations, and that creates change over time. It becomes bad when Sagittal Sam goes to the gym and his buddies are all powerlifters, and he's like, yeah, I want to max out today and get into the 400 range. And then he's just basically chasing the number. And he's just probably going to, what is he going to do? Pick the path of least resistance, muscle that weight up. That's going to put his body into a lot of stress. And then if he's fighting stress all day, this is why Sagittal Sam, the powerlifter, will need a fascial release therapy session at the end of every month, which is actually one pattern I was seeing a lot when I was doing early fascial release. There's a lot of powerlifters, but one thing I slowly came to realize is, like, I don't think it's the muscle release that they need. I think it's the positioning and the stress on their joints that's causing the problem. So, you know, so basically, yeah, you know, the stress scale is unbalanced, and, you know, we have then the parasympathetic and sympathetic. So there's the key words you got to understand, just in case you don't. You know, parasympathetic refers to the rest, digest. Sympathetic refers to the flight, fight. So forgetting flight, rest, digest, because I think that's kind of too confusing. If you just focus on parasympathetic, sympathetic versus sympathetic, this is where we are, and this is where we kind of want to be. You want to be in the parasympathetic more because we are not there enough. We spend way too much time in sympathetic states of our body, which is the stress state. Why? Society. Get up in the morning, first of all, you maybe had a bad night's sleep. You're probably a little bit stressed. You might already kind of be bordering on the sympathetic range. You have your coffee because you want to get going. Well, now you just really activated your sympathetic system. You go to work, and depending on what kind of work you do, you could really be ramping up your sympathetic system. You go to the gym because you want to work out. Yes, that is good. But you have to understand that the gym, and then what you are doing in there, the environment, the music, the concrete floor, or not concrete floors, but the floors and all the things that you're grabbing, that's going to basically stimulate more sympathetic systems. Now afterwards, sure, you're going to feel a lot better. You're going to, blood circulation's be going. Now we might we might sort of get some of the parasympathetic responses, but then you go home, you're in a rush to cook dinner, and maybe you go to bed late. And see, when we're just not generally doing enough to get into the parasympathetic range. And then you're probably understanding, well, what does that mean? We'll talk about that. But just I think the takeaway from this is understand that we are spending way too much time being stressed. And that is ultimately going to carry over to problems in the weight room. And if you're going to carry over problems in the weight room, then you're not ultimately correcting the athlete. And that's, I think, this is where the posture restoration stuff, or the appreciation to posture, breathing, and gait is really important, because we want to halt and correct and then progress and strengthen the product, not just load it up and see how, how much we can get, how much high we can jump, how much fast we can run. And all that will come actually when you get better balance. But the problem is, when they go to such extremes, they're already probably going to be in extremes of posture. So then in the last figure of this slide is just simple meditation, because, that's actually one of the simplest ways. You ask, like, all right, what am I going to do to combat this? Well, one of the simplest and old school ways of putting yourself into the parasympathetic state is meditation. You are cutting off the visual system, which is very powerful, because all the input, you're basically stopping that. You're slowing your breath rate down. I think that's the key. So anybody that's taken meditation before or done these apps that are really popular right now, you'll know that pretty much step one that we got to do is breathing. We got to slow our breath rate down. In fact, for the many people that can't find a way to stop thinking about stuff, they say, well, you got to concentrate on your breath first. And that is really key. You've got to be, can you be present within yourself? Are you focused on just your breath and neglecting everything that's trying to interrupt and distract you? So that is really just the opposite extreme, right? That is the opposite extreme of this go, go, go lifestyle, is meditation. And that's just, can we slow, and let me ask you this, is like, when's the last time you slowed your breath rate down? If you told me, well, this morning I did, well, that's good for you. And I wish I had your discipline, but, even with me, I don't always do that. I don't always do that. And it's good to sometimes take that time to really slow your breath rate down, because until you do, you won't realize, like, wow, I was just going much faster, I was breathing much faster. And there can be so many factors that are causing you to breathe fast based on what is in your environment, what you have to do during the day and whatnot. Going on to that next slide. So that was just some basic neuro stuff, okay? Just some stuff to understand about the nervous system. It's so complicated, but just understand those things. Like, we have some basic needs, what we see, but we live in stress, and we need to spend more time. And ultimately, that is related to, we need to spend more time in the parasympathetic range, and that is ultimately related to breathing, which is where we are now on our current slide. So, breathing. If we look at figure 1, which is the first one, I'm calling all of them figure 1s that are on the left. Figure 2 is going to be the next one. Okay, I'm not keeping count with our figure 5 point whatever. Sorry about that. But figure 1, which will be the picture of the rib cage, is I just want you guys to just get a little bit of an appreciation for what's going on with our inhalators and exhalators. Okay, so we got multiple, as you can see, multiple different parties going on. We got SCMs, some scalenes, those help with inhalation. We got some intercostals right there as well. They don't have it pictured, but you got some neck flexors, the longest coli, that will help with inhalation too. But we could easily argue neck extensors are also something that we use for inhalation, but those aren't necessarily good accessory muscles. If you're going to cervical extension, you're probably losing some of that, the leverage and biomechanical advantage for these front accessory muscles. So sometimes we don't actually tend to have good activation of these. This is where, now I'm going to go into my plugs again. I really like NKT, neurokinetic therapy, because this is where we learn to address this. By assessing it, is it active, is it inhibited, or is it facilitated? A lot of time people will not be able to flex their neck. Okay, well, now we know that something's facilitating and inhibiting, these neck flexor patterns from functioning properly. More often than not, sometimes it could be the neck flexors that are sometimes overactive for something else. It all depends on their dysfunctions which come with the breathing system. So, but you also understand there's inhalators and there's exhalators. We got rectus, we got obliques, and QLs, different things to help pull the ribs down. And basically we want all of them functioning as a team. We want all of it to work well. Inhalation, you want a good expansion throughout. You want those intercostals to expand. exhalation, you want those ribs to basically draw down. So this is where, you know, we can talk about breathing, different techniques. I think the most important is you're getting a good expansion throughout, and you want to see chest and belly rise together. Which one goes first is debatable, but there's a lot of breath coaching out there that only talks about belly breathing, which is breathing into your belly. That is not good. That is just very diaphragm isolated breathing. And then some people will just be naturally doing that, and then a lot of people will naturally be just doing chest breathing only, and that's very much utilizing only this upper region to get air in. So what like I said, we want just that full holistic expansion and rib cage drop. And if you're doing that naturally, your breath cycle is going to slow down. So then when we talk about that real quick, breathing rate and stress. So did you know you breathe at least around 22,000 times a day? It's been said to be, could be more and it could be a little bit less, but at least over 20,000, but around the average is 22,000 times a day. So now go figure. Let's just take Sagittal Sam, again, our guy who's in a high stress office job on this computer. Let's say he's a broker. And so, you know, he's just on phone and just go and early in the morning. And then he goes to the gym, takes his pre-workout, and, you know, does his poor lifting technique, but just wants to get in, get out. You know, his breath rate is probably going to be higher on the range, just because he's just taking more breaths a day, and it's his breath cycle is just faster. He's not exhaling all the way. He's not slowing himself down. Okay. All right, so that's Sagittal Sam. Now take Mr. Monk, who goes to meditate. You know, he teaches yoga class, but he's a monk at the Buddhist temple, and he meditates, you know, in the morning, and he teaches meditation class, and then he does breathwork class. So, you know, he's just spending his life just really slowing his breath down. You know, that a person like that could be, you know, so much lower on the spectrum just because of what they're doing. Now, we could argue that he could have his own, you know, his body could have his own set of problems. And we're not trying to say that this is the way, that's the way. It's just, where do you lie? Where do you lie with your lifestyle that you live? And so now I want to look at that next figure, the one with on the right. And it's just like, well, you know, this is the cycle that we fall into, and we just become stressed, and then your anxiety sets in, and then it just reduces the breath cycle. And then ultimately, it just all snowballs to making you feeling more stressed. And obviously, you've been very, a lot of people, you know, aware of that. You know, when they tell you when you get enraged, when you get angry, and all that, when you're upset, people tell you, well, you know, take 5 deep breaths, or, you know, go count to 10. You know, all of that, you know, trying to just get you to stop and slow down. So you know, looking at the quote below that, and let me explain that real quick. So basically, we are, you know, we're breathing many times a day. We're very stressed. We're not slowing down. We're not exhaling properly. Why don't we go look at the panic thing and go or go think of somebody that is hyperventilating, you know, feeling the complete panic, now hyperventilating. Well, what they're doing is getting a lot of oxygen kind of in and out of their their mouths and lungs, but they're not exhaling all the way, and they're not slowing. And what happens when usually they end up passing out? Okay, so what I want you to think about this is that is an extreme case of someone that's really stressed out and really panicky. They are breathing super, super fast. So now go figure, let's say this person is having panic attacks almost every week. You know, if you count the breath count on that day, you know, they could just be way, way higher on their average, but their average is probably going to be way higher than, you know, anybody else's average. That's somebody, you know, like I said, they're stressed out, and their breathing rate, they're not slowing down. They just go. So they're just breathing a lot more. So then what I want you to think about is oxygen not necessarily being the problem. They're not getting rid of the carbon dioxide, because yeah, they're getting oxygen in, but they're not getting rid of what's inside. And that's what I ultimately end up you falling, you know, you passing out as well. And so it's this false misconception is like you're trying to get air in, but the fact that we're not even slowing down to get any air out. That's what happens with, you know, the changing of gases. So by reading this quote, and this is where PRI was really interesting in showing how breathing can make dynamic changes. And so we can easily disrupt the pH balance with two or three deep breaths. pH will rise from 7.4 to 7.5, or CO2 will fall from a normal 40 to 30 or 25 in less than 30 seconds with thoracic breathing. And there's a link to that article that you will find at the end. So what is thoracic breathing? We're not going to get into that because that's directly taken, but basically that's just to tell you that if you're not breathing correctly, you're going to mess your system up. If you're breathing too fast, if you're not inhaling properly, aside from, you know, passing out, which is what the extreme cases of someone hyperventilating, you are actually going to create more tension patterns throughout your body. You are going to create more limitation in your movement capabilities. So by actually being able to slow down, you're going to alter the pH balance within your body, which actually, again, what it does, make you feel a little bit more safe, tone down the nervous system, and then now muscles are relaxed a little more and we can move a little bit better. So that's just a real quick important thing to consider of what breathing is doing. And although it's weird, although we are getting stressed and we're breathing faster, we're doing it for survival, but at the end of the day, it's not actually helping us survive. So that's the little thing we always have to remember, is that you kind of have to sort of stop the body. And that's why, and this is just to show you that, you know, we can make real big changes with how we feel just with a few breaths. And so, you know, with considering this, you know, I almost want you to, you know, go back to, you know, think of the previous slide with Sagittal Sam, the slouching one, and the pictures of him going to the gym, or the different gym. We got the bench press, you got the cardio machines, and you've got the squat. So what is basically happening is we're falling into this state of extension. And I mentioned that already before, but what happens is, as you can see, is we are getting into this chronic inhalation because we're just breathing at a fast rate. What is that ultimately doing? Well, take a deep breath in. Well, that is extending you up, okay? So we have that chronic pattern. Now, obviously, you're not going to do that, but it is kind of what is happening when we're inhaling. Then we're moving with extension. We're stressing ourselves with extension, both in terms of how we're trying to push the weight, and then also with how we're breathing. And then we're just basically living in this chronic state of extension. And that is basically ultimately fueling this whole cycle pattern. So let's see if we're I'm not going into that slide yet. So go. Get the share up. I'm not going into that slide yet. Keep it there. So sorry for technical difficulties. There we had it. I could have gone there. So yeah, okay, here we go. So, like I said, regardless of how he's sitting and slouching, our cervical is extended, we're bringing our head forward, we're going into extension patterns in that way. We're breathing with extension, but it's probably stressed out. We go to the gym, and then our whole movement patterning is becoming very extension driven. And you have to remember, that is going to ultimately limit your movement capabilities. And then if you're not exhaling properly, which ultimately is going to come back extension, we're going to talk about that. But if you're not exhaling properly, you're having all this gaseous imbalance as well, we're just fueling nothing but dysfunction within our body. So I think what we need to remember with all this is, at the end of the day, you're picking the path of least resistance. So it's easy to go this way. It's easy to move this way. It's easy for us to do this. what it is, the hard part is the challenge of stopping, slowing down, and having a little bit more conscious to it. And I think that's kind of the philosophical point of all this, is that we're so go, go, go all the time. We just want to, you know, do everything. We want to achieve things. I can't really speak for the lazy ones, because that's ultimately, you have to think of people with aiming for function. Well, we want to achieve this, we do this, and we're having these problems. Well, what is going on? And that's you know, all this chronic extension that's happening. And I think what we need to do, or not do, or we're not doing, is that whole slowing down and learning to exhale, because what we need to do is learn to control that whole midsection, and with better exhalation patterning. I'm going to get into that a little bit later. But another thing I wanted to mention is how we sleep. That's another thing that we could also be messing up a lot of this extension. People sleep in extension pattern. It's a way we get more air into, we think we can get more air into the lungs. It's an easier way to get more air into the lungs. Why? Path of least resistance. One of the exercises we'll be doing later will show you how to breathe in a different position where we'll actually be able to get more air in. But the problem is we're working more muscles, so we don't really like doing that. So extension just becomes a very favorable position sometimes, just to even rest. And so what happens is when you go to sleep, you get bad sleep. We get poor breathing patterns. You have sleep apnea. We don't inhale. We aren't able to inhale properly throughout the night. And so, you know, we just basically wake up already in this, like I said, extended state. You know, how many people do you know wake up and they say, well, I wake up and my back feels super tight. And then what happens? Well, you know, they go into their day, and, you know, everything becomes more is back-driven movements. So it's just what I want you to take away from that is to appreciate how much we go into extensive patterns, and how that also facilitates our inhalation, but it's facilitating rapid inhalation and stressful inhalation. And that's something that we're trying to manage ultimately once we get the full picture of our lecture today. So moving on with the slides. So now, okay, so how does stress and environment affect muscle tension? So I just talked about, you know, your breathing affecting muscle tension, but what other factors are there? Well, there are definitely some heavy influential factors aside from, you know, the muscular system and being able to breathe properly and posture. Your feet are definitely big key indicators of how we perceive the ground. You know, your feet need to interpret the ground. They need to react and move to the ground. I just bought, this is a, you know, random slide. You look at the figure one, the top slide. It's just showing you where we're supposed to have our arches, and what we're basically supposed to be able to have healthy, reciprocating, alternating movement patterning between our feet. We are meant to land with a flat foot and go into an arch, a reciprocating movement. And it's usually one that's not happening very well, or one might be in a really extreme pattern and not being able to like get out of it at all. It depends what the person's problem is. So no, the problem is, first issue that you always have to be aware of, that people's feet are sometimes they're big indicators of tension resonating throughout the body. Sometimes you can take shoes off somebody and they'll walk and they're immediately, oh, I don't feel back pain anymore. And it's basically their shoe and how they were making the person walk was causing this back tension, was causing their whole system to tense up. Okay. What do we do with that? Well, you know, I'm not really going to get into the feet on today, but, you know, that's why it's always good to incorporate good foot mechanics in different exercises, working your pronation, supination, make sure you're always working the tension in your foot, and just good mechanics overall. I mean, I think the takeaway again is you just want to make sure you're working all the body, and getting the feet is important part, because like I said, you want to perceive the ground. You want to receive, you know, be able to interpret how you want to react from that step. Okay. But then another way that our body likes to interpret and react and get reference, because, you know, we're moving through this world, we're moving through against gravity, we need physics, against laws of physics, and there's a lot of instability that goes here, you know, being on 2 feet and moving one at a time. Remember, it is a controlled fall at a time. It's considered a controlled fall. So, you know, the body at times does not feel the most safe doing this. Again, case by case scenario. And don't be fooled just because we think we're walking and, oh yeah, I'm fine. It doesn't mean there isn't dysfunction. Sometimes, again, path of least resistance, and because of what we think and see, we're going to just walk. We're going to play sports. We're going to run. We're going to do what we want. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to do it properly and that there isn't some kind of underlying compensation. The number two, a big way we like to really reference sensory information and just tell us that we're safe in there is teeth. I don't want to get too deep into this, but teeth are a way how our brain likes to just basically clench into, so okay, we're here, we're safe and we're stable. Big thing at night. People clench, and this is this is why we actually get bad breathing patterns at night. So the problem is that we get a misalignment, which could happen through many reasons, but you know, stress will already ultimately over a long period of time cause a misalignment. There could be multiple factors. And so if you're looking at it, when you have the malocclusion like that, that is going to cause your jaw and brain to really find that reference. And then you're going to have excessive clenching. When you have a normal occlusion, you might be a little bit, you know, you might not need to as much because you have that normal bite or normal stacking of the teeth. This is where you can almost get into a little bit of the black holes of PRI, because, you know, if you don't have if they have really jacked up teeth, you might not be able to help them. And this is one thing I've noticed even with myself, again, to this current day, now doing all these, you know, breathing techniques and everything. The one area I've noticed that I will harvest tension in, no matter what I do on any kind of exercise lift day with somewhat intensity, is that I always harvest tension in the jaw. It's kind of like a subconscious thing that I do. However, I know that my teeth are definitely having some problems of misalignment and whatnot. So it is something that definitely, these are sort of like things that are holding us back, per se. The feet, the teeth, and the last thing that I'm going to mention, vision, are all factors that are really deeply embedded with neurological influences. Vision, you know, that, like I said before, you know, it's often driving us into extension because it is what's feeding our movement. It's what makes us want to go forward. And then, of course, you know, you got your text neck there of people looking down. That's because we as humans, we were meant to look off into distances. We were meant to see wide ranges for hunting, gathering reasons, but you can maybe even argue agricultural. It's only in this recent newer age that we've been confined to desks, reading, and then computers, and now cell phones, really limiting our range of vision. And so what that's going to do is ultimately it's just going to feed your whole tension patterns. It's going to feed your stress level, because when you're going to focus on something, you're actually implementing more stress on your body. You're actually making yourself more stressed out. And then in addition, you got the visual input from the screen, as well as the information you're receiving. So that's just constantly stimulating your brain. As much as we might be getting dopamine from their likes on Instagram, you're also really stressing your system out just by looking at something so close and so technological. The body can often react really well when we just look up and look into the horizon. Sometimes I once had a client who, you know, every time he walked, when we did a little, you know, movement assessment after each, you know, bit of muscular releasing area, you know, trying to figure out all this pain and tension. One thing I noticed is that when he walked, he was just looking at the floor the whole time. And I said, well, hold up. You're never going to feel good if you just look at the floor, because your whole system is trying to stabilize itself by looking at the floor. And that's what the nervous system is doing with vision ultimately. You know, looking at the floor is a sign of imbalance, it's a sign of instability, it's a sign of insecurity. Just like clenching of the teeth, same thing. Feet, not necessarily going to tell that much, but obviously flat feet, super flat feet or super high arch feet are telling you some sign of instability or some sign of going into a lot of extension. That would be your high arch feet, you know, sign of somebody really, you know, going into a lot of extension pattern throughout the body. So there, these are just all sort of, dysfunction where the brain, finds reference. And then there's also, we've got the breathing, brain, we hold our breath or start breathing heavily. And that could be causing a lot of threat to our system. And then lastly, we have digestion too, what we eat and I guess also you could say times you eat, because if you starve yourself or eat off times, all of that could be causing threat to your system. So what the takeaway from all this is, like, what is causing us threat? And are we able to manage that threat? Because ultimately, threat will lead also to extension. Threat is the stress response, and the stress response is an extension response. Another way to think about it is you just go scare someone, and they go gas. Well, they go into a gas extension. Well, all of that is just the whole dysfunction of what I'm talking about in a extreme example, or you jumping out and scaring someone. We got stress, we got extension, we got poor respiratory mechanics. So that's what I wanted to get out with this, is thinking about extension and what it is doing to our body and what is happening with the breathing responses. So basically, we're getting poor, we're getting a lot of inhalation, not enough exhalation, and it's driving us into extension. And then we're moving with extension. We're basically living in extension. And then we have all these other side references that, with the feet, the jaws, and the vision, and maybe even and digestion, certainly digestion too, and breathing, where if they are not working balanced and harmoniously, they will lead your body to fall into postural extremes of extension. Whether it's the feet altering the postural biomechanics from the bottom up, the teeth made with the jaw, and the jaw positioning, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later, but how the jaw positioning can influence our posture and ultimately maybe bring our head forward. Vision definitely is going to bring our head forward. That's the one thing with me. So going back to the slide, when we were assessing my posture, that's the one thing I finally came to the conclusion, is that there's nothing I can do about my head coming forward because I can't see too well. So I have to bring my head forward just to see. And so that's what's causing a lot of this head forward posture. So that's another thing, and that's obviously going to put your body in a state of threat, because that's not normal. And then we got breathing, which is poor breathing will be extension, and then digestion. So that's just going back to that, is that if you when we have poor when we're eating bad food, bad quality foods, a lot of processed foods, and all that, high sugar, maybe high grain, all that, or all meat, whatever, you're going to put your body into states of threat, and the core is unable to function properly, especially when, we have digestive problems that's linked to a lot of core dysfunction. Well, if you don't have good core function, you're going to fall into extension. So sorry if I'm sounding a little bit of a broken record. I just wanted you guys to understand what is happening to our postures. We have all these sort of threats, and they're kind of causing this chronic pattern of extension, just in some way or another. So going to the next slide. Oh no, I clicked one more. There we go. So going into this next slide, you have a video here to watch of a little example, and I call this of why stretching is not the answer. So here's a video. I mean, you'll have the video narration on it, but basically it's a client of mine who was definitely in a state of extension coming into my session. I'd already seen him a few times, and he complained about hamstring problems, even though that was supposed to actually be helping us in our sessions. He was like, oh, my hamstrings feel really tight. So I knew, I was just like, well, I'm not about to release this guy's hamstrings, because that's kind of what we need. And I immediately suspected that it was going to be, it was a breathing problem and a visual problem for him, because he spends his time in front of computers all the time. He's a gamer and worked in front of computers and uses his phone. So this is a little test that I like to, that I wanted to just kind of show you guys of what happens, how we can manipulate the body with, quote unquote threats. I asked him to look at his phone. I definitely even turn up the brightness, put it in his face. we hadn't done anything, and I tested his hamstring range of motion, and it's like, you know, subpar, not good enough. Definitely, I would say, needed improvement. But instead of stretching, releasing, we straight away go into some breathing activity, and right away, within 10 breaths, we get his hamstring to a 90-degree range of motion, which is actually where we want to be at. So basically, you know, I'll let you guys watch the video, but it's just to basically show us that this is what the breathing system and the nervous system can do to you. You know, you can not feel great, and then you'll think, well, I need to stretch, I need a massage, or I need to release the muscle, I need to, you know, lay on the foam roller. But what if it's just your system is just super jacked up and you need to just breathe? Because if your system is super jacked up, remember, you're going to be in a state of extension. You're going to be in a state of extension, you're going to have limited movement capabilities. And that's what's shown in this example with my client, is that, you know, we put him into extreme extension, and it was just like, you're not getting anything. So let's calm your system down. And now you're back to, now you're at normal. So again, I think this is part of that, the, you know, strategies, you know, we can implement strategies of, you know, breathing and safety. You know, how can we make you feel safer in your environment, which is, you know, before you go to work out, is typically when you want to loosen up, I guess, right? Because you're about to, you know, go into the activities. So, you know, how can we make you feel safer and a little bit more at one with yourself before you go into, you know, dynamic movements? And so that's what I'm putting on the bullet point. If you are feeling, put that in quotation marks, feeling tight, consider the environmental stressors just as much as you consider muscles. So yeah, you know, that's one thing that gets me actually, is that, and the reason why I fell in love with all this is that I just realized, like, we have really jacked up systems, yet the industry is filled with all this, you know, release. Internet is unstable. Hopefully it's gonna connect. Yeah, so we have all this problems of release, on the side of people releasing muscles, and often we're just releasing muscles that are actually weak and need help. And yet it's just this whole system is not in balance, not working well. We haven't exhaled properly. We don't have gotten rid of all the carbon dioxide. We just don't feel ourselves. And yet if we just got back to ourselves, maybe we wouldn't feel so tight. So then in the second point, the whole stretch versus strength is what we must get right if we're trying to fix the dysfunction. And that is actually paramount. You know, stretch versus strength, it really is as simple as that. You know, you don't want to release muscles that are weak. You want to strengthen them. And then, yeah, the strong muscles or overactive ones, maybe we can release those. But even with that, it's almost arguable that why do you want to make something that's strong, not stronger? If anything, we should be trying to get stronger. And so that's one of the things with hamstrings, you know, especially with basketball players. But I don't want to limit this to basketball. I'm a basketball purist in terms of who I'm involved with mostly, but this goes for everybody. That everybody complains about tight hamstrings, and oh, my hamstring feels tight. Well, first of all, this is where you can check your posture. And then, okay, they're an anterior pelvic tilt. Well, that already tells you that your hamstrings are losing the battle. They're in an elongated state. Your lower back, if anything, is pulling your pelvis into extension. Your hamstrings are losing the tug of war to your lower back. If you're in excessive lower dot extension and you feel your hamstrings are tight all the time, maybe they're being stretched in their postural position. What if we actually gained some strength and brought the pelvis back to a more neutral state? See, they're more up here. What if we put the pelvis back here, because your hamstrings are pulling it down instead of it always pulling your hamstrings into a stretch? See, that's what we're trying to do, is this tug of war game. So stretch versus strength, good old fashioned, you know, that's the old fashioned, you know, rehab mindset. You want to get that right. And one way you want to get that right is bringing the body back to a norm, bringing the body back to a safer place and allowing it to breathe properly. And, you know, like I said, get it right and not be so jacked up, because society by itself is already going to push us to be really on the edge. Okay. And then the nervous system is king of the system's hierarchy. So treat that before you treat the muscles. Like I said, you know, if you engage the nervous system, then you pretty much get a change. However, we're gonna let me talk about that real quick. So if you remember that previous slide, I talked about feet, talked about jaw, talked about eyes. Okay, so that's one thing. Then there's, maybe I can call this the disclaimer to this. So, you know, I've done this video, and maybe you should, at this point, hopefully you've watched it. You know, I've achieved 90 degrees in the hamstrings. All we did with is 5 reps. Is this permanent? Not necessarily. Okay, so if he has, this guy in particular, we'll call him Joe. If Joe on my table here, who, like I said, is also in front of computer screens a lot and all that, and so I suspected a visual problem, and for this incident, we took the visual system out, and he was able to increase his hamstring as well as breathing. So we know those are factors. So, but what if, you know, let's say after this, I have him walk up and down. If he has limiting factors in his feet, or if his jaw's really off balance, his teeth are really malaligned, or his vision is just so poor, and his brain is not able to find a safety reference, or he's he's in some kind of threat just by walking, and this is subconscious, he has no idea, this is just his system. Those tension patterns will go back. He can go back on the table, we can retest him, and he'll go back to under 45 degrees or whatever he was originally. And that's actually kind of how this works, which is one of the reasons why PRI gets a bit of a bad rep. So PRI does these neural tricks, we'll call them neural tricks, where basically you check the range of motion. One of the typical ones is the arm, you know, humeral, IR, ER, but they have one with the legs too. Okay, it doesn't move. Cool. We do some breathing, 5 deep breaths, they recheck the range of motion, immediately it goes down. So that's one of the big sell factors and wow factors of PRI. And of course it attracted me too, but I had a little bit more of a hankering of why is this happening? And make no mistake, you know, when you do some of these tricks and, you know, you put it out, the first time I put this video out, one of my, you know, colleagues, you know, a PT, he even just was just like, you know, that's just temporary. You could have got that just by doing something like slapping in the face or something. You know, he said something stupid, and I was just like, you know, why are you trying to negate the importance of my post? But, you know, people even get, you know, offended by like, oh, why are you pulling these tricks like you're some magician? And that's the thing, it's not about that. I think we're trying to teach the client what their breathing system and how it does and what it can influence over your body. And then number two, and I think which is more of the takeaway, is that, you know, can we find a safe zone? All right. So in this particular situation, he came to me with postural pain problems, and we're just doing manual therapy breathing. But let's just say we were in a gym. Okay, it was a gym. He comes to me and I'm like, my hamstrings feel terrible. I don't feel like working out. Okay. Well, that's part of what we're trying to do here is, can we find a safe zone? Can we put him into like a little bit more safe zone? And then we'll go into that lift. And then, you know what? We could always come back to the safe zone. We could always do a few more breathing exercises. This is something that you want to teach him ultimately to long-term manage. But, you know, whether you get an instant change that lasts permanently or an instant change that immediately goes back when they take 10 steps, you know, walking and then get back on the table, I think it doesn't matter. And that's where, again, this backlash of PRI comes, is that like, oh, these are just temporary fixes. And it's like, cool, that's fine if you want to think that way. But what I want to do is take this information and use it to our advantage. So if we know that things go back, then we know that this person's probably really stressed. We probably know that he has got limitations with the eyes, the jaw, or the feet. So, you know, we can manipulate certain things to make the client feel safer. You know, maybe you can really release the feet, do barefoot training only. Maybe we can spin that to going outdoors even. You know, if we go outdoors and work outside barefoot, I'm sure the feet will feel a lot better. The jaw, tough one there, but maybe you can implement talk tests while you're doing lifts. So for me, I say I clench the jaw even though I do try to implement proper breathing. Well, one thing's for sure, if you're talking, your jaw is going to be a lot more relaxed. So with the jaw, we can maybe implement talk tests. And with the vision, you just want to make sure while the athlete's working out, they're not burying their eyes in the head into the ground. Can they look around? Can they look up? Can they maintain their balance while they're looking up? Can you give them a cue from the other side of the room and then be able to hold the exercise, complete the exercise without completely turning their head? Can they sort of like look at you out the corner of their eye? I think these are some of the things that, you know, this is all we're trying to do with this information, is that can we manipulate, what can we manipulate to make the client or athlete feel safer? So we'll go on to the next slide. So now, you know, I think up until now, I've talked a lot about one particular pattern problem, and that is extension, which hopefully I've explained of why it's happening. You know, path of least resistance is just something that we're going to fall into easily, especially considering that, you know, again, human function, and probably the most important function is gait. And you just consider moving forward is progression, right? I mean, to get somewhere, you're going to move forward. You're not going to move laterally. You know, very few people spend their time moving lateral shifts. I don't think it really happens. It's a very unnatural thing. We are for the most part going forwards, even in sport, you know, with exception to a few. Then obviously you're staying in your zone, like, you know, tennis, ping pong, that kind of stuff. But for the most part, even with the multi-change direction of sport, number one is going forward. You're going to the basket, you're going to the goal line, you know, you're going at the person to hit them, you know, what it is, you know, whatever it may be. So that's why we get a lot of this, you know, extension and whatnot. And that's how, again, fueled in with these neurological influences to make that happen. Now we're going to talk about some other neurological influences that are really underlying in the human body that just kind of mess this whole posture thing up. And so then my next question, and we're talking, as you said, human asymmetries, and this is why I asked the question, is why posture doesn't matter. You know, this is the question, why posture doesn't matter. So yeah, you looked at, you know, your client did the pictures up on, you know, you noticed your things of what, you know, tilt this way, rotated this way. Okay. Extension pattern. And typically when I was looking at posture, that's all I was really focused on, is just a little bit more of this control and this extension. I didn't really know what it meant neurologically or what was happening on the deepest scale, but, you know, that's just kind of like what you want to fix. But, you know, in terms of understanding what's happening with these tilts and rotations, well, now let's talk about, you know, what really goes on in the human body. And this is where it gets deep, and this is where, you know, I invite you guys to, you know, do your own research, you know, read some basic neurological, neurology books, or looking at, you know, anatomy even. You don't have to do a two-law research to see that we are not balanced. We are not meant to be balanced. However, the real question is like, how are we honoring this information? What are we doing with this information? And that's one of the reasons I put PRI, or Postural Restoration Institute, on such a pedestal, is because they are the ones that are ultimately putting this information out there. That the fact that we have these underlying asymmetrical biases, and they are influencing the way we move. These other programs that I mentioned, including, mentioned, you know, anything to do with fascial movements, whether it's anatomy trains or whatnot, you know, all of that, you know, is relevant and important, but no one ever talks about the underlying asymmetrical biomechanical biases that we have going on. And let me break them down for you. So number one, we're going to look at this picture of the diaphragm on the left. And you know what, and in fact, well, I'm going to backtrack real quick, is that, you know, number one, you know, we have more organs on the right than we do on the left. And that's one thing you got to understand. You got a big liver, you got, you know, and excuse me if my mind's going blank. You know, all these things going up on the right, fewer things going up on the left, even though we have the heart, which is very important, because obviously you got to have something on the left. You can't have nothing. You know, you have something on the left, but on the right, we tend to have a little bit more going on. We even have bigger lung lobes than we do on the left. Now, going on now to talk about the diaphragm. This is where I invite you to get an anatomy book or anatomy app. Make sure it's updated though. And I want you to go look at the diaphragm. Now, hopefully it is an advanced picture or whatever, an updated picture, because this is what I want you to look at. I want you to look at the attachments on the vertebral column, particularly on the right side. And I want you to notice how there's obviously more going on the right than there are on the left. Okay. And that is powerful influence, especially from the diaphragm, when those are the ligamental attachments. And then you have to go figure the amount of breaths we take per day, and go figure the stress response you're in. That is going to have some influential torque on our posture. Now, also consider that the liver, which I already said is a big organ, weighing, something that weighs over there. It's supporting this right side diaphragm and giving it a bit of a more optimal dome shape. So that's let's just say that's just optimal. That's what basically suggesting that we have stronger influence on the right. So what do we have going on the left? Well, there's actually a lot more flat open space. There's less of that dome curvature. And so what we actually have is more of a rib flare, and we actually have more empty and open space. So, and then you also have the, vena cava and aorta coming on now, or esophagus. But basically, we actually have more space on the left for air, but we have more support, as we'll call it, for breathing mechanisms on the right. And this is a natural pattern in just about absolutely everybody. This is proven in anatomy and any cadaver dissecting classes or workshops you want to do. You will see that you have this diaphragm that is better supported, better positioned on the right than it is the left. However, again, it's not that the left doesn't do anything right. The left actually has more space and air to get air in. It's just not working, or doesn't have the powerful influences to work as well as our right does. Okay, so it's just a quick little scoop on the diaphragm, and again, factor in all those breaths, factor in all that stress, factor in your extension movement patterns, and then factor in path of least resistance. What that could end up chronically happening is this favoring bias of this right midsection. Now, I'm not gonna get into what about this and that first, but let's talk about some more asymmetries first. The brain, big massive factor. Okay, and then you can look at the hopefully I'm not in the way too much. My videos hopefully not in the way. Okay, so basically, yeah, you have a left side brain and a right side brain, and on this little diagram, it highlights some of the different things that they do, but they do different things. It is important to understand that the left side brain has different uses for the right side brain, and generally speaking, we're using the left side brain a little more than the right. So that's why I go back to, I'll say it's a disclaimer, your left is not, we're not going to say that our left is not good. We're good with our left to certain things. It's just there's a bit of an imbalance. So the left side of brain is generally being used a little bit more than the right. Why? Because of speaking, reading, listening. These are very much cognitive skills that we need. And the right side is a little bit more of this kind of like, coming back to yourself, just like, they say intuition, emotion, imagination, context, spatial relationships, music, art, awareness. So, your creative side. We're not necessarily doing enough of that, in our lifetime. Okay, so, or in our day-to-day, so we're dominant left side brain users. But what does this mean? So this is also interesting to know that the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. So, that go figure, that's some more influential factors to this, right side usage. Okay. Then you just got some other things to consider with the jaw. So TMJ and stress. So because what I like to say that the jaw is a reflection of what your brain is thinking or doing. And I mean, it kind of makes sense because, that's where your tongue lives, and your jaw, and, you basically speak what you think, right? We tend to speak what we think. So yeah, the jaw is basically a reflection of what the brain is thinking. So people who are stressed out, people who are, spending too much time worrying about what they should be on Instagram, or people who are watching political videos and seeing what they don't like, they're gonna harvest tension, and a lot of that is going to be reflected in the jaw. TMJ problems are ultimately chronic stress problems. And that's why I tend to, it's funny when people are like, oh, I got TMJ problems, I need Botox, or I need trigger point release. Not that trigger point release won't help. I'm not the one to speak for Botox, but I'm sure it's helped some people. But here's the thing, your jaw is clenching for a reason. There's certain things that are happening. Now, there are biomechanical influences that we'll talk about later, but right now, what I want you to understand, that your stress is going to influence your TMJ shifting. And again, we're going to talk, if you go figure about which side of the body you use, that TMJ tends to shift to the right, especially in the closed position. Now, when we open the jaw, again, we have a shift that can go left and right depending on compensation patterns. But generally speaking, a stressful mindset will equal a TMJ shift, and usually we'll find that that's going off to the right in terms of with a closed mouth position. And then, like I said, the eyes. Move my video down. Yeah, the eyes. So what we need to understand with the eyes is it shifts with the S's. So the biomechanically, right, when we get a shift going on, which let's say our breathing system has influenced a lower right regional orientation to the right, lumbar, sacral, okay? Sacral. So we have the 3 S's that are so key to basically dictating our posture. Sacrum, sternum, sphenoid. Sacrum, as you know, in your hip, sternum here. Sphenoid is inside your head, which your eyes are attached to. It's like a little butterfly-shaped bone that sits inside your head. Kind of looks like a Silence of the Lambs moth, actually. Yeah, it looks like a moth, actually. So, we have that inside of our head. Our eyes are attached on it, and that bone inside of our head, even though our skull is fused, the bones in our skull most definitely move. And again, the more stress, chronic tension, lack of breathing we have, the more they're going to be fused. And so shifting most definitely occurs within this, especially if you're going off to the right. Biomechanically, other things are going to go shift off to the right. There'll be compensation patterns to the left to make things balance out, but generally, if we've got this sacrum going one way, the sternum's going to go that way, and then we've got the sphenoid that tends to somewhat follow. And this is just that special relationship. So I just want you more just to consider these things, that, if we have a shifting one way, we are really fighting a whole shifting, which is what we need to now, again, go into strategies of how do we influence that going to the other way. And just to understand that this whole, the sacrum, sternum, eyes can all be something that's going to pull us in one direction, okay? And then the last point I want to add with that is trauma, the mental block. We have no idea what trauma anybody's been through. And it's not necessarily our job. We're not psychologists, but there is even such a thing as birth trauma. You could have trauma just because you didn't like how you were born. And, that's why you screamed a lot as a child throughout the night, wet the bed a lot. These are some classic examples where, you have harvest some fear inside of you. We don't know what it is. And, that's, again, something you'd honestly have to connect with so I get out the sunlight, you'd honestly have to connect with a psychologist to really understand that better. But basically, trauma, to no matter what way it comes to our lives, as unfortunate it may be, it's going to influence all of this. It's going to influence shifting. It's going to influence these neurological concepts. If you are a threat, feel safe, then it's just, again, put you into tension. And as we've now seen with these neurological biases, it's going to more than likely shift you into this right shifted state, just basically purely based off of biomechanical advantages of the rest of the breathing system, biomechanical advantages of what I just said with the brain, the eyes, and all that. And again, path of least resistance. If you were down, depressed, and not happy, yet you were constantly telling yourself, no, sit up, keep your head up, keep looking up, keep breathing, keep dropping those ribs, sure, you wouldn't have any problem. But who's doing that? You know, when we're down, we're depressed, or we're gone through serious trauma, and trauma is a big deal. And I'm not telling you guys to become a psychologist. I just want you guys to be able to appreciate that if we have that in someone's life, that you're going to have a tough time dialing down these breathing patterns. You're going to have a tough time getting them out of extension. You're going to be fighting more. You're going to have more pushback from this athlete. Trauma is definitely, like I said, it's the mental block. But again, we can just implement strategies. You know, maybe we can play some music that they like, or maybe we could do some extra breathing to start the session. Maybe you can tell a joke of the day. There's different things that you can do. I think the bigger thing right now is taking this human body as a whole and appreciating it holistically, but we cannot appreciate it as this head with 2 arms and 2 legs and with the posture of however it falls. We have to appreciate it as a human body with lots of asymmetrical biases that we haven't necessarily mastered the balance of everything yet. And then some other last things is like how we chew, how we hear, and how we step. You know, all of that is going to ultimately influence shifting as well. You know, you don't think about how you chew, but what if let's close the blinds a little bit. There we go. All right, so you don't think about how you chew, but what if you're chewing excessively on the right subconsciously? Actually, that could equate to some shifting. What if you have a compromised auditory system, so now you're always leaning in with your right ear or your left ear? That could be influencing some shifting. And then the way we step, we're very, very much all programmed to step dominantly with one way. Think about it, just think about it as your sprint start. I don't necessarily want to think about it as stepping up to a block. Hey, which leg would you step up on a block? Just think about if I said go right now, how would you step? And this is the best example of this actually with basketball players, of the pump fake, step back when they stagger, they travel and they stagger to step. Just that will just always tell you of what they're comfortable of exploding with, what leg are they what they're coming off first with. So we all have that bias, and I guess what we're trying to do here is see what we can do with it. However, it's just bottom line is just understand with some of these things. I think just understand that you can at points be fighting the uphill battle. And that's what I found with certain clients and certain athletes is that, their feet are so jacked up or their visual system is so jacked up that no matter what I try and do, they're just really not getting in. They're just staying these tension patterns, chronic tension patterns. That's the way it is sometimes. With the nervous system, it can very much be an uphill battle. What your goal with learning these things about the nervous system is to educate your clients and athletes in ways that allow them to understand themselves better. You don't necessarily want to be dropping all this information, but again, like how can I say, all right, let's just do this breathing exercise and now try to lift. Didn't you feel better? Yeah, that's because we made you, we calmed you down before we went into the storm. Give them some kind of now a little bit of analogy, and now they kind of maybe feed into what you're saying. But just understand that there could be some uphill battles. Don't get frustrated. At the end of the day, you have so many different strategies, especially as a trainer or a strength coach. You have many strategies to regress and progress exercises. And although you might never actually fix somebody, you might be able to implement something to get them to learn to move better. And I think that's the most important thing, especially when there's things that are out of your control. Teeth will be out of control. You need a dentist. Bad vision will be out of control. You need an optometrist. And even some feet, as much as we can work on the feet and do all the corrective exercise and releasing, some feet will be just so jacked up and will never be able to interpret the floor in a fair way just because the person's biomechanics, height, weight against gravity and physics are just too much. They might need orthotics to particularly put them into the correct movement pattern. So sometimes, again, referring out is very much a thing when we have chronic tension problems and these underlying things that could be holding us back. Now, with all of this that I just said, I know I went pretty deep in here, and some of you guys are thinking, whoa, what the hell? This is way beyond my scope. I get that. And seriously, we're not here to check on people's jaws or measure their jawline. We're not here to, make people, read ABCs off the wall or anything like that. All we want to do is have an appreciation for these systems working together. And especially this area tells us a lot about this area, and there will be a link for an article on that at the end. Basically just the relationship of facial postures on the whole body, on the posture of the whole body. And a lot of that basically comes down to your TMJ, but also the eyes. So, what do we do is it's just having appreciation and trying to maybe sometimes do some detective work if you need to. If you know that they're not breathing well, they could be holding their breath, they're clenching their jaw. So you want to make sure they exhale through their mouth and maybe implement the talk test. Like I said, if they're always burying the head in the ground, that's a visual issue. You can just try to influence them to look up. Different strategies in that regard. Okay, so with regards to that, what is happening basically with this bias? Basically the real question. Like, all right, well, what do we do with it? So we have this right shifting and compensatory actions. Let's check out this slide real quick on the left. So this is just taken from the PRI posture restoration manual. It's a nice little diagram to show us the compensatory actions of the spine. The actual image on the left of the skeleton goes a little bit deeper to show some of the things happening in the cranium. I don't necessarily want to go into that. What I'm more concerned with is the picture of the biomechanical, what's happening with the spine, where you got the lower area, the lumbar going off to the right, T8 going off to the left, T4 going off to the right. That will be your sternum. C4 going off to the left, and then atlas right, occiput left, and then sphenoid, that's your last S up there, off to the right. So why is this happening? So these are just, the sun is glaring through, you need to move. So what is that? These are basically normal biomechanical compensatory actions. We get an underlying shift. This is what happens, and then, we have to move throughout life. Okay. So then how are we going to move? How are we going to manage that? How are we going to balance? We have physics, we have gravity. We're all shifted. Are we just going to walk with the shift? Well, no, there needs to be something to kind of bring us back. And that goes back to my point again of why, the left's got to be good at something. I'm not trying to say we are right dominant. We have certain dominancies to the right, but there's going to be some things that the left's going to do well. And that's just for the simple fact of being able to balance. It's just some people are going to be worse off than others. So yeah, we have these normal compensations. And so here's some special synergistic relationships I want you guys to definitely consider, because this is what's going to be happening with the body. And sometimes this is a telltale from your posture, but sometimes it's also, where, areas need work. So jaw to hip, that's a synergistic relationship. When the jaw shifted, usually the hip shifted. Usually it also means that we're not getting as much, stability and reference there. So again, it doesn't necessarily, I'm not trying to say you guys have a dominant hip. If we get a jaw shift with a hip shift, it could mean that we're shifted that way, but it also could mean we are unable to shift ourselves off to the other side. So you are lacking that ability to explode from that side. So you are lacking some stability, and you are having a jaw clench to make up for that stability. So it's almost like a little hand-in-hand thing. Hopefully I did not lose you there. So one more time, you got a jaw shift, hip shift, and it could be from, two things. You could be just a biomechanical response, but if we are lacking that stability because we are completely loaded on that leg and we're unable to explode to the other leg, we're going to be trying to find that reference and clench our jaw, because it's like, oh, I'm trying to get something here. I'm trying to get to the other side. Could be other way. It just depends on persons, but just understand the jaw and the hip, they're a very synergistic relationship. Cervical to lumbar. I mentioned this earlier, but cervical lumbar Yeah, almost identical. The cervical moves one way, lumbar is going to follow the exact same way. This is why I cannot stand it when people look up during a squat or look up during a deadlift. You got to fix that, because that's just going to activate your lumbar response. If you're in a lumbar extension, you are an extension, and then you are losing good breathing mechanics, which we will go into in a little bit. Bear with me. But so just basically understand the cervical and lumbar are in that relationship. So mutuality is key. A little side one here, cranium to rib cage. Think of that as a more lateral thing, but not necessarily lateral. Excuse me. I think of it more of a triplanar thing. What's happening here is a reflection of what's happening here. And this is why the body is absolutely wonderful. Getting very compressed on this right, a lot of good ability to use, but we're not getting enough expansion here, because that's one of the things that we're seeing right here, is that we're getting a lot of compression. A lot of the shifting has caused our right side to compress. Part of it is that diaphragm, it's influencing you to really be pulled down. So, we're getting that tight compression, and then obviously we're not breathing well. We're not able to expand well, stimulating stress responses. Let's just think of all that stress that's happening up here as well, that left side of the brain controlling the right side of the body. So we're getting a lot of, we get a lot of that chronic tension of compression from just that overall stress. Now, there could be different it could be, with the head, we go on to a whole different topic of left side bending versus right torsion. I'm not really going to go into that. That's very deep PRI stuff, but just understand that this is all working together. It's just all this big relationship, and that what we think here dictates some of what we are down here. That's just the biggest takeaway from that, and then the last point, sphenoid, sternum, sacrum. Yeah, they're in a relationship. When one goes, they're all going to go. And so when they're all going to go, we're not going to get a good expansion on this right side. And that's the problem. We all got this torque to the right side. The left side is actually doing well, and we're actually getting air in. The problem is we're not reciprocating. We're not good at pulling our left side down. So what we're trying to say is what these positions have actually done is actually given us good core, good exhalations on the right, but poor inhalation, poor exhalation on the left. The left is good for getting air in. We get good at that, but we're getting not good at getting air in on the right, because we're just really compressed on the right. Okay, that is the general pattern with what we're getting with this rib cage diaphragm position. So then the factors I want to consider with shifting is that based off of that, everybody has their own compensatory story to suit their life's needs. So, just depends on, who it is, what they do. They're going to have different sets of balances. Some will fall into it more than others. Some will be all right, but maybe those people are all right, did a lot of different movements, sports at a young age, and take good care of their bodies. Just like I said, just with these asymmetrical biases, everyone's going to have some kind of way to cheat themselves out of it, because at the end of the day, you have to progress forward. You have to move forward against gravity, balance, against physics. We need function. And so, we'll make do with what we got is basically what's happening. So posture is a reflection of many systems working together and what's struggling to work well together. So that, I said that before, but that kind of summarizes, what we have here is that we have a lot of this right shifting and systems bringing us over, what's struggling to basically bring us over to the other side. I think that's an important thing to think about right there is, do we have good breathing mechanics on the left side as well as we do on the right side? Because if we know that our good breathing mechanics are so heavily influential to the right, and that we don't have that reciprocating on the left, if we're able to reciprocate those good breathing mechanics on the left, we may be able to implement a better shift over to the right. So there's an example of things are not working together. And then, like I said, the jaw, vision, or stuff like that. Again, you can maybe influence people with different ways. You're not going to see that it's going to fix things, but maybe you can influence and change their workout environment so that they're not so like this all the time in their state, in their chronic states, okay? So right shifted, looking down, tunnel vision, that kind of stuff, okay? And so based off that, that's on my last point. So scoliosis, right, is an example of a person on the end of the spectrum, unable to find any left shift integration, okay? So you aren't born with scoliosis. You fall into the pattern of scoliosis. And you know, it's basically a neurological dysfunction, or you know, just basically hyperdominancy to one side. Big, powerful indicator of breathing as well as stance integration. And completely lacking it on the other side, or again, there may be just something that's just only keeping you on the right. So sometimes it could be you're not getting that reciprocation from the right hip. But anyway, it's just the point is to understand is just you have too much influence pulling you to the right, not enough pulling you to the left. And again, what we're trying to do is how can we unwind that? How can we implement exercise strategies to get them a little more reference onto the left and be more comfortable on the left, be more balanced on the left? Can they breathe? Are they able to hold these positions and not tense up and freak out? You know, because they're obviously not that good on shifting to the left. So scoliosis is just pretty much a good one to sort of have in your mind and just kind of understand what's going on, just because, like I said, there's different degrees for someone to be like, say, yes, I was declared I have scoliosis by a doctor. Yeah, no, and you can look at anybody's pictures and they'll either kind of have something when they won't, or they'll have different degrees. But the point is, it's just right shifting with an, again, you're telling a tale. And what you want to do is be able to integrate better with left shifting. So, right. So basically, you know, that's scoliosis, but most people, which is a lot on the right, but most people will have some kind of counter mutations. And that's basically what I was saying, is the left has to do something. So just with that being said, so now what I wanted to really get into with all this right shifting and all that, and this is probably what's bugging most people. Well, I use this hand, I use that hand, or I use this leg, I use that leg. Well, look, this is where you as a baby or an infant with these biomechanical biases and your lifestyle and your environment, you will become the product of environment. Some people figured out to use their left hand. Some people figured out to use their right hand. Some people use the left leg. Some people use the right leg. I think the biggest takeaway from this is that very few people are actually good at all four. Very few people can say like, yeah, I'm just as good as my right and my left, and I'm just good with my right leg and my left leg. That is very, very, very rare. For the most part, most people with this are first of all, most people are right-handed, because that becomes the neuralized with these neurological underlying patterns, shifting everything, that becomes the easier hand to use. What makes, so we have a right hand usage. Well, what makes most sense for movement with the right hand is actually the left foot. So typically, you ask people to kick a ball, you know, they'll plant their left foot, they'll kick it with their right, or they'll step, you know, and like basically they'll step with their left, or sprint start, like I said, driving with their left, and they're you know, they're moving their left arm forward, which basically the right leg comes forward. So you have this this opposition of right hand usage will typically go with a good left leg. Lefties, who are far less common in the world, however, are much better suited on their right leg. So even though they're using the left hand, they have still a lot of influence on that right side. And not only that, a lot of lefties end up being good with their right hand. So then there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that they by using their left hand, they're actually making their right just as good, efficient. It's just we neglect the use of the left hand as righties. Two, the world is set up to be right-handed, so you kind of have to. And then just even looking at a lot of these athletes, every athlete that I've come across that was left-handed was always so skilled, and they tend to actually be really good with both hands. You know, they're skillful, and athletes, and I think off the top of your head, James Harden is probably the guy that we most can look at is known to be ambidextrous. And I think one thing they say about him is he's pretty good with both legs too, in terms of being able to create distance, jump from one leg to the other and whatnot. So that's the what we have to think with all this, is that it doesn't really matter. Is like, well, are you left leg or right leg, or are you left-handed or right-handed? It's just, well, are you good with all four? Because very few people are. And and then some people are in a really bad state of, they're only good with their right hand and only good with their right leg, and then they get a lot of imbalances. That's your scoliosis people. I've never met anybody that's good with the left hand, left leg. Maybe there is, but again, if you can be good with all four, I think that's the part of the key. Basically, I think that the biggest key to this is that as we move with each step, are we managing our shifting from hemisphere to hemisphere? And that's all you want to ask this, is that are we know that we're going to go this way. All right, do we have what it takes to take us this way when we step onto our left? Because if we don't, that's where we get the good old classic basketball player walk. You see it all the time. Just watch a basketball player walk. It's like slop, stomp. They stomp, but it's a bit of a cool walk too. They're definitely in their stride. But point being, they're spending more time on their right leg than they are their left. With each step they're taking, they're loading onto their right and not loading as well onto their left. They're exploding well off their left onto their right, but they're not exploding well from their right to their left. So, back to that punchline is as we move with each step, are we managing our shift from hemisphere to hemisphere? That's basically the question you want to be asking with all this complex information of shifting and compensatory actions, is what are we doing to handle that shifting? So now that was, again, bit of a deep end plunge right there of, whoa, okay, well, what's all this shifting going on? Because you want to honor that. You want to understand that that's going on. You definitely need to appreciate some of those things going on. But now let's take a step and go back to, extension and some of those compensatory actions, because, we talked about a lot of what's going on with extension, but now, how do we progress forward with this? How do we move forward? Because again, going back, let's look at the image real quick. Is a path of least resistance, but with respect to gravity and physics. And that's how we will move ultimately. I'm going to minimize my screen. But here we have, on the far left is pretty much a state of extension. You've got the lower lumbar that's extended. You got the T-spine that's extended. You got a cervical spine that's extended. You got your anterior pelvic tilt. Yeah, typical. And, that we have that person there. On the right is more of your mutual goal. And I would say that's why it's called in PRI, it's right there, it's called the positional goal, because that we just basically want to give the brain a reference of this. We're stuck on the left. The thing on the left, the position on the left is can we manage and better handle position on the right and maintain that. You got to understand is that the state of extension is, we call that, is because the brain wants to use it wants to use these extensors. It wants to use back extensors, wants to use calves, it wants to use your quads, things to move forward. Not so much glutes and core, which are harder for us to use. And although glutes are an extensor, but they're also posturally of what they can do to bring us into more of a mutual state, more of a flex state, be less extended. So, and I guess it's also symbolic that we're not using our glutes enough. We're constantly driving with our back. We're constantly driving our calf. And so I guess that's just that perpetual pattern extension of not even tapping in to our, bigger muscles that we're taught, which we've always been taught are very important. Like, from the beginning of training, I've heard that glutes and core were the thing. Well, now it's kind of coming into sense of why. And again, like I said, although glutes are an extensor, they're also a transverse plane maneuver. Like I said, explode the hip from one to the other. Because if one hip is exploding at a time, because yes, gait is what we're doing one at a time. If one hip is exploding, it's going forward, it's going to take you to the other hip. So it's going to shift your hip to the other side. So left leg explodes, hip goes to the right. Now, can the right hip explode to take it to the left? That is what we tend to be missing, and especially with lack of glute control, we're not going to have as much of that. Hence, you're stuck in the shifting. Then a lack of core, well, that's going to be more extensive. Lack of core will lead to lack of exhalation, which leads to poor core postural positioning. Too much stress and not enough exhalation will lead to excessive extension. So then you have the extension pattern. So it's just understand that it's it's easier for us to fall into that pattern than to be more balanced. I'm just going to move my video for there. So like I said, when in the bullet points, when progressing forward, the body will do its best to compensate and normalize its posture as best as we can to maintain balance with respect to underlying patterns of shifting. So the body's not going to care how it's going to do it. It's going to try and get it done. It's shifted, it's a little extended, but okay, I need to just get to class. I need to get to practice. I need to get to the fridge because I'm hungry. Whatever it is, we're going to do it. And again, second point, the brain takes the path of least resistance. So we're going to find a way to do it. We're just going to do it whatever is the easiest way possible. But then, what I want you guys to understand here is learning movement strategies with poor breathing strategies will only further facilitate the postural dysfunction. And last point is, can we move forward and find and maintain the middle ground? So basically, all I'm trying to say with this is we need to implement better breathing, because by implementing better breathing, we're going to implement better core. By implementing better breathing and core together, we can integrate that with exercise. By doing that, we're gonna enhance our movement capabilities, and then we'll hopefully can we maintain those movement capabilities and those mutual positions with this improved breathing and moving system. So I guess that's kind of what we're trying to do there. Is all you need to know is that the state of extension is just nothing but a rushed, primitive, thoughtless movement. We're just trying to get it done, but can we be a little bit more mindful? We are supposed to ultimately exhale as you contract and come up. Well, are you facilitating good rib cage movements with that exhalation as you move? Just general of how well are we managing reciprocation? I think that's the key word is okay, you extend, but can you reciprocate? And how well are we managing that? On to the next slide. Okay, so what happens with all of this? Okay, we got a big important slide. I'm going to minimize my video, but okay, so we got lots of things here. Myofascial chains and the functional core subsystems. So now let's go back to the myofascial chains. Just we have to understand. So we have this understanding of we have this understanding of the body, this asymmetrical biases, and then we have this fascial system. So that's the top right picture. If you look at that one with the blue, we have these myofascial lines. And this is how they generally run. This is how many, the different lines that we have on our body. So we have this myofascial lines, and we have this asymmetrical bias. What ends up happening? Well, we end up with this unilaterally dominant contralateral pattern. So again, you're good with your left leg and your right arm, but you're not necessarily good with your right leg and your left leg. And so, and that's some of the things, the key with this is, again, what are we doing with this information? What can we do, with knowing that there's biological biases for you to go one side? Well, what are you utilizing to take your body dynamically in all different directions? And so going on a little slight side topic here, to understand the myofascial chains and how they work, they've actually they're sort of broken down into four functional subsystems. And basically, and this is not the one chain functioning at a time. This is how Gait works with respect to the myofascial lines. We have these four subsystems. We have the deep longitudinal system. That's the first one. It will be your peroneals, your hamstrings, connecting through to the pelvis to the opposite erectors on the back, on the opposite side. So you got the subcutaneous ligament that goes across. So for you to walk, your left hamstring has to be functioning with your right back extensors, and your right hamstring has to be functioning with your left back extensors. Okay, cool. Then we got the lateral system. That's the next picture along. So there we have, your on one leg's adductor, abductors connecting to the opposite QL to stabilize the pelvis. That's your lateral system. So that kind of, and again, don't get me wrong, you have a lateral line of fascia that can, of course, act independently. And you have a back line of fascia that can, of course, act independently and arch you into this crescent plate shape. The front line fascia can completely curl you up, but that's not functioning gait in contralateral reciprocation. Like I said, running, jumping, throwing, striking, all the things which ultimately get categorized as gait. For gait to happen, we need opposition. So with these functional core subsystems of how the slings are used, we get a lot of opposition. So with the lateral system, we've got, leg muscles on one side, back muscles on the other side. Anterior oblique sling, that's the third picture over. So now this is the front. So you got adductors again in relation to the opposite obliques, okay? Again, that crisscross pattern, X pattern. And then finally, you've got the posterior oblique sling. You got the glutes connecting through the thoracolumbar fascia to the opposite lat. These are all chains that are working together to help you run. And again, the question what I'm asking is, how are we utilizing and balancing these functional chains without underlying asymmetrical bias? That's really is key. So we have an asymmetrical bias. It's shifting us to a particular stance. We're more dominant there, and we have all these rotary aspects pulling us there. What are we doing? What are we implementing in terms of our movement programming, into our core programming to really get us over shifting to the other side? And that's where it really comes down to is, you do this with core movements, you do this with some mobility activation movements, not necessarily strength, although we can obviously integrate certain patterning to help, but the more often than not, you just want to provide a wide variety. We can go into swings, all kinds of kettlebell swings, where kettlebells are no longer really being done in a bilateral pattern. We can do kettlebell swings in a staggered stance. There's mace club swings and all that kind of stuff that we can all mimic and help enhance all of these functional core subsystems. There's tons of stuff we can do with med ball stuff, and chop variations and things like that, all to ultimately shift you and break down the movement planes into, your frontal and transverse. Because remember, extension is sagittal, and we are training sagittal a lot. We live in sagittal. How well are we managing frontal and transverse? Well, let's figure out some activities that will be able to do that, whether it's, like I said, med ball, cable, or core movements, and to utilize these core subsystems to get us a little bit better integration on either side. And actually, you'll find that when you do that, you'll be able to improve somebody's static posture. But like I said, I'm not too worried about that these days as much as I am about the function. So, just to hammer down on this. So contralateral reciprocation is gait, that is jumping, that is throwing, striking, swimming, climbing. And so, it is all centered around our path of least resistance and whatever's most dominant to complete the task. So, point is, we don't get the reciprocation. There is no reciprocation unless we create it for ourselves. We invent movements for sports based off of these dominant patterns. We learn the skill on the dominant pattern. You know, that's basically, again, the product of the environment comes down to is like, well, what have you been learning? Well, have you only learned it this way because you're only comfortable learning it this way, or have you actually spent time to constantly learn it this way too? And it is a bit of a use it, lose it approach. I mean, I, as a basketball player, as a young kid, always heard that how left hand was a weakness. So I actually made myself use my left hand a lot. And perpetually, I've done that throughout my lifetime. And nowadays, I don't have a bad left hand at all. And I actually have pretty good, you know, awareness and balance to my left. I'm able to manage a lot of this very well because of my integration of my fascial slings and my functional core systems are all in check, my breathing in check. You know, I use it, lose it. You know, even though I have underlying problems with my vision, I have underlying problems with my teeth, and probably have some underlying problems with my feet too. You know, I'm able to manage that just based off of, you know, you use it, lose it, and give yourself a little bit more of that reference and shift to the other side. So, and then that's another thing of why, you know, early age specialization. So I mentioned I was a basketball purist, and that's all I ever did. And I honestly don't think it really helped me athletically. You know, could early age specialization be hindering our development? You know, more variability is definitely better, especially in a developmental standpoint. So as much as, you know, you want your kid, son, whatever, daughter to be the next, you know, best basketball player, football player, whatever, you're probably going to serve them better if you give them lots of different sports to play at a young age, give them lots of different movement patterning to be used to. Even though basketball is a multi-directional sport requiring multi-different movements, it requires cardio just as much as it requires explosive activity, it requires strength just as much as it requires finesse and balance. However, basketball is an incredibly extensive driven sport. So, you know, and obviously it's so skill driven that it is completely shifting. And, you know, that's the one problem I have, again, with having this mindset and working with my population basketball players, is that I have to understand that they're going into a sport that's completely shifting them to one side. And then what am I doing with that? You know, and how am I going to load this athlete with heavy weights and get them stronger, knowing that they have got these torques and imbalances? So another reason of why I want to consider these fascial planes and core subsystems is because this is your key to kind of untackling and unwinding these issues that we have on the inside, you know. And so just being able to, you know, the more you can, you know, the more you can explore and break down, the better it will be for the athlete overall. And so, you know, again, at a young age, when you're learning so many things, you know, the more exposure to different things, the better we'll be and the more skill we'll ultimately attain. I think what I want to say with all this is ambidexterity of stance and hands is rare, but it should be the goal. So talking about stance first, well, not very few people have ambidexterity stance. No, you don't have to think just jumping as high as one leg as you are the other. That will probably never happen, especially, you know, someone in a technical sport like basketball. Your dominant leg, you'll always get higher than the non-dominant leg. But can you stabilize well? Can you load well? Can you eccentrically load well? Can you hold the ISO just as well on one side and as well as the other? Can you shift, balance, all that stuff? You know, doing a one stance as well as you do the other, and being able to reciprocate. Hands, a little difficult because that's also where we start to get into a little bit more technical skills. And eventually, you know, you're going to test your nervous system there, because obviously we're going to pick our dominant hand to try a difficult skill first. But, you know, there's still things we can do with our non-dominant hand to constantly test it. Because again, if you're using your non-dominant hand, you could encourage some shifting that way, especially if we're, you know, manipulating all these different things, balance and whatnot, and trying to get ourselves to trust each leg, trust each hand. The key to this is just this thing is that, are we just moving forward or are we adapting to life? And the reason why I say that is that we're just moving forward, not really thinking about it. We're just going to be falling into these dominant patterns, which we know we have underlying dominant patterns. But are we adapting to life? Means are we trying to take care of these weaknesses? Are we trying to become better at orienting and shifting in ways that we are not naturally doing? I just think that's a big takeaway from this, is that, you know, yeah, the progression of forward is great. Yeah, we want to get stronger, we want to get faster, jump higher and all that. But, you know, you will eventually fall into a pattern, and you will eventually potentially fall into pain or whatnot, or could be, or you could have movement limitations. And what are we doing to adapt and take ourselves out of that, basically? So getting there, guys, getting there, almost there. So, you know, what do we want to happen with the ribs? So stacking the rib cage is probably number one, what we want to do in terms of the sagittal plane, which is extension, managing extension, is sagittal plane. And that all comes down to basically breathing. So looking at this first figure, okay, you know, we got the multifidi on one end, big important, you know, and that's going to be working. You know, your back lumbar position is already in a position advantageous position for the multifidi to engage. So they're going to be on and working. You got the diaphragm on top. That has to be working. It's working 20,000 plus times a day. It's on. It's usually more often than not facilitated in what it's doing. The transverse abdominis, as well as rectus abdominis, but transverse abdominis is the deepest layer, and that's the more of the exhalation muscle that we're concerned about. That's on the front side. And then on the underside, we have muscles of the pelvic floor, but otherwise known as pelvic diaphragm. So with some, this is where, you know, some people, in terms of what they teach of how to engage core, no matter what, you want to, first of all, you want to be able to stack. Okay, stacking means getting your pelvic diaphragm underneath your regular diaphragm, or vice versa, getting your regular diaphragm over your pelvic. That should take you out of lordotic extension and should facilitate some transverse abdominis engagement. Some Pilates or people going through intense rehab will even teach engagement of the pelvic floor muscles. I actually don't feel like, you know, I don't do that as much. I'm more worried about just breathing and proper exhalation. If you get that, you get good enough pressure. However, that's the general thing is, you know, are we stacking? Because if we're stacking, you know, your transverse abdominis, once you exhale, and then basically, are we stacking with exhalation? Once you exhale, transverse abdominis engages because it's pulling the ribs down to exhale. Now you're going to get more of that stacking system that we want to be that we want to attain. So just a real quick side topic, and this is where core engagement kind of falls into two different categories, and I've learned both. And so you have drawing in, exhaling to drawing in, and just exhaling pressure pushing out. So if you look at, and that's what abdominal pressure, it's kind of talking about the same thing there. We're just talking about subtle differences. There's intra-abdominal pressure. If you look at the figure A with the green, so that's what we're kind of getting. Yeah, we got pelvic floor coming up, diaphragm coming down. Yeah, a little bit of lower back extension, and then the abs going in. Everything is kind of coming inwards, okay? That's intra-abdominal pressure, okay? Normally, we're not doing that. And so you look at B, you're going to get excessive lumbar extension, and you're going to get the core ultimately pushing out. And that's the problem, is that we're losing the core eventually. We're losing the ability to even fire the core at its optimum. You're well overusing your lower back, and so we already have this imbalance. And then so we got some couple of causes, diastasis recti and pelvic floor dysfunction. You know, we're not pressurizing properly. Okay, so that's just kind of just to give you the gist of why we want to exhale pressurize, especially going into lifts. So you think about the deadlift or the back or a back squat, or, you know, and they're going for something really heavy. if they're not going first for that good exhalation to synergize the pressure, they're going to lift and pull with their back extensors. Once they pull and lift with their back extensors, they're going to probably lose their core positioning, and you're just going to feed that dysfunction. Okay, so that's the understanding of why we want this kind of pressure, especially when we lift. And I'm sure many of you guys already know this. I'm probably talking like a broken record. The two ways these differ is, and DNS is actually dynamic neuromuscular stabilization is different from PRI. This is where the one thing they disagree with. And this tends to be the PT rehab mind, the two different ways we activate the core. One, yeah, like I said, is pressure kind of sort of throughout, and that's where you kind of get that what we see with A. What we want to do in PRI, and what we're trying to do a little bit more, is actually get more pressure going in and get less extension. So notice in this figure A on the intra-abdominal pressure of the top one, you see you have the lumbar going into some extension too. You got everything going in. What we are trying to do here, because the problems start when there's an imbalance, and when we already have some extension going on, that's something that we're going to be fighting. So basically, due to the nervous system demands, the Postural Restoration Institute's way of favoring core and breathing is to really exhale and draw in. And that basically takes us out of extension and basically gives the brain a reference of what we are not in. DNS, they're not so much about the underlying asymmetrical biases. They're more about how do we move and progress through the three-dimensional world. So they're going to, and they just teach just being able to pressurize just throughout. And that's how you handle these movements, which could be challenging. That's why that's their way of doing things. And I side with the PRI because, again, what we're trying to do with this PRI mindset is untangle things. Give references to something that's different from what you're always normally in. What are we able to give you a different feeling from your extreme? And part of that goes into reciprocal inhibition. So the goal with that is ultimately fight extension. You know, if we're always in extension, the back's always locked, and we generally don't have good mobility of our back, is, you know, well, can we activate more of the core? Can we get that reciprocal inhibition and get the lower back to ease off? And by being more mutual, you know, at the end of the day, it's going to be more advantage. So here's the thing. We might try to lift with extension because that will biomechanically thinking that there's less weight to lift off the floor. You know, it's easier. It seems easier. It's easier for the brain. And maybe biomechanically, we're giving ourselves an advantage to lift the weight off the floor. Okay, that's good if you wanted to lift that heavy weight. But if you're trying to preserve the body, prepare the body, make the body feel its best, we want to be more mutual. You know, we want to learn to lift the heavy weight with proper pressurizing, with proper movement mechanics, in a safe zone. Okay. And so by being more mutual, which is the goal of this whole stacking of the rib cage, right? You know, we are able to move joints around better. We'll be able to move fluids around better. And that goes from inflammation to synovial fluid. Neurons, neurally, we'll be moving that around much better. We're moving the bones just around within that whole region. So it is in our favor to have more of a mutual state and therefore improve the stacking and less extension. Just simply because you're getting increased range of motion. And because by increasing range of motion, you get to increase the space between the tissues, which means more blood flow, which means more movement and increased workload distribution. So bottom line is, as much as we think the path of least resistance, the easiest way to get the weight up, because your brain says, okay, lift it. I'm going to lift it with extension, or I'm going to pull it up with extension. Yeah, you're not using all these other things that are keeping you in this mutual state. But what if the mutual state is going to be a better desired state for you to ultimately lift this heavy weight? That is the key. That is what we're trying to gain with this breathing and pressurizing, which is ultimately what you want to do throughout lifts, and which is what we're going to talk about now. So here's interesting. So how posture affects range of motion. So here's another video example for you guys to help, to kind of give you guys a little example, of how stacking helps obviously counter our extension, and what extension is doing in terms of, again, limiting our movement capabilities. When we're in excessive extension, we lose movement capabilities, whether it's in the arms or even in the legs, both of them ultimately, and even in the neck ultimately. So then we come back to this stretch versus release debate. Excuse me, stretch and release versus strength debate. Are we releasing muscles that we need to be releasing, or are we actually, making them weaker? Because when you stretch and release a muscle, you're deactivating. So you are making it weak over in the long run. So, we have a person comes in, and this is what my video is in. It's about the shoulder flexion. So let's say you have limited shoulder flexion. And they always come in, first thing they do is lacrosse ball that whole area, and they just, get a little bit better, but it's just not really getting better, okay? So, have they done anything to address their rib cage? Have they done anything to address their back extension? And that's the one thing we have to understand here before, I'll let you watch the video at some point. But looking at the points on the side, so poor breathing patterns lead to poor posture. Poor posture leads to limited movement capabilities. So it's this hand-in-hand cycle that once we are stuck in extension because we have poor movement capabilities and poor breathing mechanics, that's only going to limit the movement capabilities even further. Excessive movements in extension lead to poor control of the rib cage and pelvis. Well, obviously, go figure. And that's what causes the limitations in your extremities. And our misconception is to think that we need to stretch and release these extremities when, you really want the stabilizers around them to be intact and good and strong. It's the foundation. It's all this, the midsection. You want to address that first. And then if your arms and limbs can move properly, then you're good to go, basically. And so without control and proper management of the rib cage, we will never acquire the optimal stability and mobility of our scapula. So just a quick little punchline at the end is that as much as we want to, release the shoulder joint and do these external, internal rotation movements, sorry to bash on anybody's protocol there, but, and if you're not addressing that rib cage, you're never going to have good shoulder movements. You're never going to have good shoulder stability. You're going to have compression and pain in those areas. So it's got to start with the rib cage, which is why now when you watch the video, I want to tell you, this was my third take taking it. So, and obviously we're in home quarantine, so I didn't have anybody to use an example at the time. But there should be a little bit of a range of motion increase, especially if you're pretty jammed up. Test your shoulder flexion. Go into this flex breathing position and then retest your shoulder flexion and see if there's an improvement. Obviously, you have to go in, you have to give the breaths your all. It's really important that you inhale all the way, exhale all the way, get rid of everything, recruit that core tension. Once you do that, you can immediately see a slight increase in your shoulder joints. And that's all because we've managed the rib cage and stacking properly. So I'll let you watch that video and then please try it yourself, just to give you a bit of an example of how powerful this breathing system is and how we can use it to our advantage ultimately. Because how many athletes come in feeling tight, but make no mistake, as much as there are athletes working their cardio system, how many of them are slowing their breath rate down and exhaling all the way? Very few. They're constantly breathing at high rates. They're probably very extended. So they're probably going to have very limited movement capabilities. So before we start destabilizing some of the stabilizers, it's good to address this midsection and stacking and see what we can achieve first with just doing that. So go ahead, watch the video. And I guess the key with that is, okay, so again, you get this improvement in your shoulders, stack your rib cage, you taught yourself how to breathe. Same with my earlier hamstring range of motion video. Okay, is this temporary? What can we do with this? All right. Well, can you maintain this position or some of these principles in exercise, both low intensity and high? Can you maintain high pressure with no movement limitations on your regular lifts? Or can you maintain high pressure and go really heavy with some movement limitations on your max lifts? So again, that's where, we want to ultimately lift heavy and we want to go into some power and force production. But spending your time there is going to probably stress the system out and neglect weak areas. At the same time, you don't want to blast yourself with core and correctives the whole time. You're not gonna learn. The body needs stimulus. So again, can you maintain these pressure positions, slight throughout dynamic movements? Those are your regular lifts, your core, whatever. And then can you maintain this super high pressure, but maybe have with movement limitations, but go on to your max lifts. So just being able to just own it, I think that's the key word, is own your breathing, own your ribcage control. I mean, how many athletes hold their breath and exhale at the end? And that's the thing, is like that goes into, again, the different styles of core bracing. The DNS style is, again, slightly a little bit more of, they want you to breathe and move the air, but again, there's not enough movement in terms of ribs coming down happening. And I think that's the more important thing, is like, are we doing that with our exhalation? We tend to hold our breath because it recruits more power, and we think like, you're trying to really get everything going to exert as much force as possible. What if we could stay in the safe zone and do it with more of a good controlled exhale throughout the movement, dropping your ribs, a lot more conscious and good technique to it. And that's all it is, basically, stay in the safe zone. I mean, it's pretty old school. They tell you to breathe with the exercise. Are you doing that properly? Are you able to maintain that, manage that, not freak out, stay in the safe zone, basically? I'm saying stay in the safe zone again, because I think that's another thing where we want to really consider with all of this, is like, again, what is putting you in threat? This could be many different factors putting you in threat, some of which you can control, some of which you can't. But what are we doing in terms of staying in the safe zone? And breathing, at the end of the day, will always put you into the safe zone. It will always will. It just depends on, are we going to do it in a more intense exercise like I'm doing right here, or more of a passive one, which we'll do in the next video, as I'm about to show you. Okay, so getting there. So what is the point of all this information, right? We are getting there to the, we have all of this, and maybe at this point I'm like going over some of these heads, because like, okay, what is this? What we're supposed to do with it. At the end of the day, all you need to know is we're here to assemble strategies. This is what we want to do. And we want to implement, like I said, stay in the safe zone. So we want to implement breathing strategies to help restore some neutrality to our posture. Because again, if you control the breathing, you control the rib cage. If you control the rib cage, you will control the extension. At this point, we can go and try a much more moderate, less intense exercise, a little bit more, again, geared to posture. Well, all of these, the previous exercise is also geared to posture, but this one is on the right-hand side here, with practical example, the 90-90 hemisphere bridge for posture and breathing. It's a really great one to, again, fix the sagittal plane. If anything, we're just really focusing on the sagittal plane, taking your back out of extension, giving yourself a little hamstring activation, taking a lot of our extensors out of the equation, giving your feet something to ground on, and allowing yourself to expand into the ribs and drop the ribs. So that's just a nice little exercise. It's a classic staple of PRI, but they have many variations. I like to start a workout with that one sometimes, but there are days I'll do that in between or before a deadlift set, before I go into my max deadlift. Either with players or myself, I like to sometimes do 5 breaths in this. Why? You just take yourself out of extension, because I know that, I've done deadlift, I've done box jump, maybe I've done some bench press and pull up. And now I'm going back to my deadlift. Well, I've just done all these extension driving activities, and some of the stresses involved in lifting the weights maybe cause my system to extend a little bit. So this is just another 5 breaths to remind myself and activate some of the weak players, and give myself a reference of the other side. And that's how we are assembling these strategies. And you can just use a simple warm-up exercise, or you can use something that you jump to here and there, or you can use it something that they just do at home, away from the court, away from the weight room or field, that they can just do at home. Because again, the athletes are gonna be in pain at home. They're gonna go into aches and whatever. And if you can give them certain things to help bring some neutrality back and enhance their breathing, this is a great one. Again, you are attacking the sagittal plane in a really restorative fashion, bringing nice length tension relationships to your muscles in your hip, from your quads to hamstrings to hip flexors. And again, allowing the lower back to not be extended, you're allowing the body to be in a really calm state, and you're enhancing your breathing in that position. So we've got some stability, some calmness, and breathing. That's why it's such a good one. So that, because here's the thing, at the end of the day, you gotta manage extension first. So that's before I even talk about this picture of on the left here. I want to tell you, with assembling strategies, you've got to manage extension first. Then we progress forward and manage gait. But first is, can you manage extension, stack the rib cage? Once we can do that, we can worry about shifting from side to side, where there the goal would be really to reciprocate and alternate with exercises. Gait is contralateral activities, and that's what we want to attack with our program. So going back to strategies, we got strategies to enhance breathing and reducing stress. That's number one. That's kind of managing extension right there. Strategies to manage movement in all 3 planes. Well, that's some more managing extension as well as gait shifting. Strategies to manage movement with better breathing. That's attacking extension again. I'm just making sure we're not overly extended. And then unilateral based strength training. That, again, to really target, your shifting patterns, or really target your balances, your strength on either side of either extremity, and just reciprocate and alternate. So, with my lifts, a lot of the things I like to do is single leg, single arm work. I do have a time for bilateral, and I do like deadlifts. I do like military press too. Bench press, I don't do as much, but I love dumbbell bench press. And with that, we can even do a lot of variations from single arm to alternating press to get a lot of more of this rotational contralateral reciprocation going. Squats sometimes, but I'm not a big fan of the spinal loading, and I do a lot more lunge, split squat work. Again, you've got to handle single leg stance. And that, for me, it's like, you've got to be able to handle your shift. You got to be able to take yourself out the shift. Once you can do that, we will be in a better place to handle big, heavy extension-based movements. So I do like the deadlift. I do like to load the body and build force production. And I think that is important for us to be able to jump higher eventually. But again, unless you can manage that shifting side to side and manage the tilting of extension, you're going to run some problems. And again, you're going to have more progression with your body and mechanics if you do it the right way early on. And I think the important is to understand is that there are no real fixes to all of this. They're just management strategies. Are you as good at one leg as you are on the other? Good. Are you able to manage all of those balances and breathe well on one side as you are on the other? Good. Are you pressing and hard and able to hold your core as well as one arm as the other? And just basically just chipping the body down. And that's when we go back to the fascial movements and the core subsystems. And I just want to make sure that we're not neglecting these areas or these ranges, these movements, because frankly, a lot of traditional programs will reflect much more of a bilateral pattern. And so you're not going to exploit these other areas of contralateral reciprocation, which is basically the key to us moving forward. So going on to second last slide. Here we go. We're thank you for sticking with me. Here's some sort of concluding thoughts, take away from this is, can we breathe optimally and reduce stress on our body? Bottom line. I mean, I think that's all I really wanted to say with this is that, can we breathe optimally and reduce some of the stress that's already being put on us through society, but now can we, meditate for a few times a day and take ourselves into a calm state, or breathe properly before our weightlifting session and throughout our weightlifting session to keep ourselves in a safe state. That's key. Can we manage postural control of our rib cage stacking? So, that's just kind of further going into that and extension. If you manage your breathing, you're going to manage your rib cage. But just having this thought and conscious thought of, okay, I know this is going to be easy for me to extend. What am I doing to bring this down? And that's one of the things I like to do in my bilateral lifts, heavy lifts, power lifts, is having more of this conscious awareness of the extension. If the athlete muscles up the weight and it's all extended base, I'm going to tell them to breathe harder and have a little bit more awareness of the midsection to lift it. You just got to have control of the rib cage, and it starts with breathing. Can we manage the biomechanics on either hemisphere? So like I said, the shifting. We're stuck on one side, we're shifted. Okay, do we have the right chain of muscles opposing what we're doing, opposing what we have pushing us to the right? Do we have that opposition chain of muscles to push us over to the left? Can we manage the biomechanics? And some of that really does start with breathing. So don't get me wrong there. I mentioned extension and shifting. The thing is, if you shift and you lose your stacking, you're not gonna maintain your shift. So they kind of have to go hand in hand. But ultimately, you just want to be able to have a bit more conscious awareness of the biomechanics of your body, what you're going through, because you're not going to be aware of all the little things that are happening. So what are we doing to sort of integrate these patterns to be what I'm going into my fourth point of reciprocate and alternate? I said that over and over, and that's all we got to do at the end of the day is reciprocate and alternate. It's how we were designed with our fascial system. It's how we move and complete these athletic tasks. It is really the key to athletic movement. As much as we thought extension and power was, reciprocating and alternating, it really is, because that's when you're not gonna fall into your weak stance and weak limb and go into injury. It's when you're gonna able to keep yourself in a safer zone and not be in such extremes. And then to counter off on that is like, can we handle single leg stance, right? And that's the biggest, one of the biggest things here is that we're good on one, are we good on the other? We're good on one, breathing well on one, are we good on going the other and breathing well on the other as well? Now, you might be thinking, oh, well, are we doing this with balance activities or what? To be honest, this is where you as a strength coach or anybody working in a gym, your limitations are endless. Yes, there are strength patterns that, you're going to have to favor, but like I said, if you take a dumbbell bench and you go alternating, so now you're already working some reciprocation, alternation happening there. Implementing that with a single leg bridge, maybe, now you got single leg stance instead of putting yourself on the bench. Rows, or we can make your rows into all kinds of single leg stance activity where you're supporting yourself on one leg in a stagger stance, rowing, to even in a quadruped position. We can all manipulate all these exercises. That's the beauty of workouts and techniques, is that we can always change the technique and make you shift to one side and use one side a little bit more than the other. And I think, again, that is the key, is like, are we reciprocating? Are we using both sides? Or are we constantly bilaterally planted with 2 feet on the floor? I mentioned med ball, tons of rotary activities, going off, shifting one side to the other. So that's powerful influence right there. Cable chop work, core work. all stuff, really good rotary aspects right there. And then kettlebell swinging, mace swinging, club swinging, all of that stuff can, you know, really integrate our system and make you balance from left to right, left stance, right stance, breathing left side, right side, left arm, right hand, left arm, right arm. And at the bottom line, at the end of the day, is muscle memory is key, right? So you have to think of, with all of this, you're just trying to create good memories. That's all you're trying to do. You're trying to get one leg as good as the other, because when you go out in the field, when they step onto that bad leg, you don't want it to be bad, okay? We do heavy lifts, bilateral. We go for force production because that's what we're trying to do, is force production. That's the muscle memory aspect that we're chasing. But what have we done with our underlying patterns? What have we done with these underlying asymmetries? What have we done with these shifting and extending extremes that we're following in? You know, and then your bilateral movement pattern is not going to feel good at all once we're not in that, you know, neutral state and really favoring to one side. So, you know, as much as we want to do the heavy lifts and all that stuff for muscle memory, we have to understand that gait is also what we have to incorporate into our muscle memory programming. You have to have single leg stance, balance on one side. You want to make sure that your core system, breathing, is balanced, or the subsystems are all balanced on one side to the other side. So bottom line, I think bilateral is great, but can you go in and out of it? You know, can we do it, do something else, bring ourselves back to neutrality, do the bilateral, and manage that? You know, what reference do we have taking us to the opposite, you know, of the healthier ranges? What healthy reminders are we giving the body, basically? You know, the go of life is feeding it one way, but the go of the weight room could very much be feeding it the same way. What healthy reminders are we giving ourselves? Are we doing any breathing implementation? Are we doing any of this postural awareness stuff? Can we adjust, be comfortable, and breathe within an exercise? So while our extension dominant patterns really want to take us through the squat, you know, can we learn to be comfortable, breathe, and have a little bit different technique because we're allowing more muscles to work? You know, that is key with all of this, you know, because a big part of extension is rushing through movements and just wanting to get over and done with. Your body's stressed. You just, let me get through it, and this is what's easy. You know, being comfortable and being able to breathe is more of how you're going to find that neutral ground. Are we prepared for single leg stance? Are we doing enough unilateral training? These are all things you want to be considering. And then keeping your threats down, you know, keep your stress down, which helps manipulate recovery time. Ultimately, whether you're talking recovery time on a long standpoint of your 72 hours, or even recovery time between sets. Like I said, I do a deadlift heavy, and I like to do my hemi bridge before I go into my next set. That's ultimately just to help you recover. It's the calming before the storm. So, you know, keeping threats down, maybe there's different things that different people will need. Like I just mentioned, you know, you could implement something to help them not clench their jaw. You could do different things to help them not look down so much by maybe coaching them from a distance. For feet, you might be stuck there, but maybe some barefoot training, or, you know, outdoor training and doing different stuff with the feet. But ultimately, you know, maybe you want to turn the music down. Maybe that's stressing them out. Maybe, again, your personality freaks them out. You want to soften up a bit. How are we keeping threats down? How are we manipulating unilateral strength training, single leg stance, stacking, breathing, stepping? Muscle memory is the key. If we got stacking, if we got breathing, and we got stepping, we learn muscle memory, or input. If we get muscle memory of those three things, your body's going to be in a great place. You're going to be in a much more healthier range. You're going to recover faster. You're going to keep muscle tension down, keep moving well. I don't believe it will compromise strength gains too much. I deadlift pretty heavy, and although I could go heavier if I extend and force it, I deadlift to my max and almost never have any lower back tension, lower back pain. And it's all because you're staying in the safe zone. Are you exhaling? Are you breathing properly and able to manage your stress levels and able to manage your extension?
and ultimately be able to manage your shifting. Because remember, if you're stressed, you're going to be shifting. Just as much as you're going to be extending, you're ultimately going to be shifting. So manage your stress and be able to reciprocate, alternate. Memory is key. Some final looks at references, just because I know you guys are dying to find out more. If you stuck with me the whole way, thank you so much. Here are some books to help kind of open up your eyes to what I was talking about. You know, you got number one, you got Anatomy Trains by Tom Myers. That will break down the fascial system and how it's all integrated and there to make you move in multiple directions. And it's just something there that we should appreciate. I thought it was a very interesting book, and I love fascia, but I love it even more now, even though it's been years after I read it, because knowing just how it influences the body, and it's meant for us to, it's there to help us move through three dimensions. It's just there to, it's your gold mine to use. It's your system to exercise and make better. So go ahead and make the most of it. I would say. Next book, On Intelligence. This book is about muscle memory and sort of exploring the nervous system and how it basically follows chronic patterns and models of prediction and whatnot. So basically you just learn how muscle memory is the key. And the way it links, although I'll give you a slight disclaimer, it is also about how somebody who understood neurology wanted to invent robots and was struggling to invent robots that could mimic the brain based off of muscle memory, and how that's impossible to replicate in robots. And it just gets you really thinking about, yeah, we really do filter through just what we've already seen and done before, and we just pick the best case scenario and then we do it. Therefore, it is even more important to implement strategies to manage underlying asymmetrical principles. That's why I recommend that book. It's a very easy one, easier than Anatomy Train, short read, good little conceptual book. Craniosacral Biodynamics, 1 and 2, very tough read. But if you want to know more about what this, how this controls all of this, you might want to read it. If you want to also learn about how the sphenoid bone is, all mimicking the sacrum and all that, you might want to read it. It's going to also get you to really think about trauma and appreciate what's happening, again, within the person and how that's affecting their posture, breathing. And maybe, again, it will be a dead-end black hole that you might run into, something that you can't fix, but at least it's something that you can think about and implement some strategies to help your client. Some articles. Now, with references to all of what I said, there are tons of articles that I could list for you. I picked 2. You can, in the roundtable, you can always reach out to me and I can give you some more. I just gave two. The first one is on how the gases of hyperventilation and how the gases affect tension in the body, and carbon dioxide from lack of exhalation. I talked about that in an earlier slide. And the second one is, I mentioned that too, is the relationship between the basic facial postures on the body posture. And that's how the jaw is basically affecting the rest of the body. 2 simple basic articles to kind of give you an in-depth, or not in-depth, a little insight on neurodynamics, on how they're affecting our body, how breathing is affecting the body, how the jaw is affecting the body. Because you just basically want to consider those things, because if that's affecting everything, then you're not going to get a good deadlift. You're not going to get a good squat. But if you can change all that, you might get a better deadlift. You might get a better squat. And so with respect to that, if you want to know how to manage these biomechanical positions, if you want to understand how to progress and rest properly, I recommend these 3 courses. I mentioned them already. There's some links to them, but go check them out. They're really great. PRI is, I would say, at the top in terms of laying out this biomechanical information, giving you some exercises to manage shifting and extension. Dynamic neuromuscular stabilization, that's going to give you more of a homework protocol, good stuff to handling gait, breathing, and just basically teaching you about, abdominal pressure and triplanar movement. And then urokinetic therapy, if just that's more of just an assess protocol. But if you want to know how deeply the breathing system can affect other things as well as the visual system, go check them out. They're pretty good as well. So that is it. That was tough. That was really tough for me to regurgitate all of that that's in my head or that I've been studying for the past, 5 years. But there's some definite truth to this there that we're finding more and more about the body. It is a complex system, but we're learning that it's not a balanced system at all. And one thing about breathing is coming more into the forefront because it's the way to ultimately balance our system. And nowadays there's more and more talk about breathing, which is a good thing. So I encourage people to look more into it. However, that's just the scratch of the surface. We also have to consider, the neurology, what is feeding us, what is driving us, and there are some obvious underlying principles that, make us or shift us to one side more so than the other. And it is up to us as the movement teacher or strength coach or therapist or whoever you are to teach our client, well, you're always moving this way. Can you move this way? And remember, there are no fixes. There are no right one ways to do anything, which is one of the reasons why I have not necessarily mentioned any of those. There are just strategies, and I've shown you a couple with breathing of what to do to implement better stacking and potential better shifting once we get into our gait. But it is a long process, and like I said, there's not one thing that's going to work. It's about you understanding what works for the client and you understanding what is putting the client at threat. Because once you can control that, manipulate that, and put them into a safer place, get them breathing better, get them slowing their breath down, they're going to be in a better place, have more movement capabilities, and probably in the end run, be able to lift heavier. So that is why I think all this is important. This is why I think every strength coach needs this information and should use it. I still think traditional lifting is great. I still think Olympic lifting is great, so long as you honor stacking and gait in your program and your human asymmetries, because that is those underlying things that we are born with. As much as we love extension, the three-dimensional world is what we really have to function in, and that is what we should be preparing for. Thank you for listening. Hopefully that wasn't too long. We got the questions, Q&A coming up. I'll be ready to answer whatever you have. Hopefully it won't be too challenging. Hopefully I didn't leave out too many details, but I'm pretty sure I have, because PRI, which all this is based on, is such an in-depth world. And it goes, each class or is a layer lower. It gets deeper and deeper. And I've tried to give you just the view into the view into the abyss, hopefully, of what all this means. So check out the articles, check out the books, check out the courses, shoot me any questions that you'll have, and hope here's to happy quarantine and learning. Keep on learning and keep on moving throughout the world dynamically, three-dimensionally. Keep shifting, keep breathing, keep exhaling, keep threats down, and keep breathing. Bye for now.